I'm opening up both the adjourned regular meeting and special meeting notice for today, but I'm recessing the special meeting and closed session item until after the conclusion of the adjourned regular meeting. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Jacobowski.
Here.
Councilmember Paul.
Here.
Councilmember Deedy.
Here.
Vice Mayor Shepherd-Rami. Here. Mayor Huang.
Here, the agenda is posted 72 hours prior to each meeting at the following location: the City Hall, the Crow Public Library, and the Recreation Department. It's also posted on the city's website. The city welcomes public input. Members of the public may address the city council by completing a public comment card and giving it to the city clerk prior to the meeting. At this time, the public may address the city council on the items that are not on the agenda. Pursuant to state law, the city council may not discuss or take action on issues not on the meeting agenda. I reserve the right to place 3-minute limits on duration of comments. Staff may be asked to follow up on such items. Is there anyone wishing to speak at this time? Mr. Suesugu and Mrs. Sabun, please come up. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Houseward Sugu. This is Deborah Sadoon. We're both members of the San Marino Public Library Foundation. Thank you for allowing us to speak on behalf of our upcoming event, Delicious Destinations. Delicious Destinations is a fundraising event aimed at providing funding for our aging computer systems. With this event, we're targeting more than 35 computers and other computer systems related types of infrastructure. This event is proposed for Saturday, November 16th, and I'm hoping that all of our City Council members will participate in sponsoring in this exciting event. We recently had commitments from a few of our council members, and we thank you for that. And we're hoping that we have 100% participation in our City Council, and in hopes that we all support the public library. We're also acknowledging our City Council members in our typical social and media newsletters for thank you for their support. So please mark this on your calendar. We're excited to have this again. It's been a few years, and we want to see all of you there. It's going to be an exciting event. Do you have anything to say?
Can you repeat the date again?
November 16th.
Great, thank you.
And it's just wonderful to bring the entire community together. You see people from newcomers up to people who have been here for many generations, and so it's a very positive thing, and thank you for supporting it, and hope to see you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yes, please.
Sorry. I also wanted to thank so much the foundation for this, particularly that it is a community-wide event and they're doing a great job, and I know people are very excited, and I'm happy to sponsor. And also importantly for the city, that you've spearheaded your effort toward the computers and purchasing computers, which will be a benefit for the city long-term, and also relieve budgetary pressures on us. So I really commend you for picking out something that we all can benefit from as a community, and all the library users, and also to make that the goal of this year's campaign. Thank you very much.
Okay, next is a presentation, Southern California Edison's Wildfire Mitigation Plan and 2019 Reliability Reports for San Marino.
Good morning, Mayor Wang, council members, residents of San Marino. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Jenna Soriano. I am the Government Relations Manager serving cities in the San Gabriel Valley for Southern California Edison. And I am here today to discuss our wildfire mitigation plan, as well as the reliability report for San Marino. The copies of the reliability report are in your packet that I just distributed. Oops. Put this down. So just to go over briefly, Southern California Edison has been partnering with the community for 130 years to provide safe, reliable, affordable, and clean energy now. We are focused on our clean power and electrification pathway that will help meet the state's goals in terms of reducing pollution and moving us towards a clean energy future. A little bit about Southern California Edison. We have a service territory of 50,000 square miles, making us one of the largest utilities in the country, which encompasses 4,600 circuits, 1.5 million poles, and 119,000 miles of transmission and distribution lines. We service 15 million residents via 5 million service accounts on an annual basis. And yearly, SCE spends about $4 billion each year maintaining and upgrading infrastructure. This is primarily focused on updating our underground cables, our poles, our transformers, basically all the equipment that brings the power to us every day, as well as readying the grid for new technologies that will help us bring in power from renewable energy, such as solar, wind, the solar panels we have on our homes, allowing that energy to come back into the grid, and also allowing us to isolate and target the areas that need repair, etc., as opposed to having large-scale outages. We're trying to improve on that, as we'll speak later with the reliability report. Our clean power and electrification pathway has 3 pillars. The first being decarbonizing the grid, greening the grid, so as much as possible increasing our renewable energy sources and how we utilize those. Last year, Edison was able to, 46% of our power came from non-carbon sources. So we're very proud of that. The second pillar is to electrify the transportation sector. As you may know, transportation is the largest cause of pollution. So our vision is to have 7 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. So we are working with the state, the Public Utilities Commission on programs that make it affordable and accessible for folks to own electric vehicles and to be able to charge them conveniently. The third one is to electrify our buildings, since that is also a source of pollution. However, we are focused on space and heating. Contrary to some news or misconceptions that are out there, we're not trying to take away your gas stoves. However, we would like it to make it easier for you to buy a gas stove and install it, buy an electric stove and install it should you wish to do so once your gas stove is ready to be replaced. Moving on to our wildfire mitigation plan. Edison, for the first time this year in February, filed the wildfire mitigation plan that was required by legislation passed last year by the state, SB 901. And our wildfire mitigation plan has several components. One, we are ensuring that we enhance our inspections of our infrastructure and remediate whenever possible. We are increasing our situational awareness, so we are installing weather cameras and HD weather stations and HD cameras throughout our service territory, as well as engaging weather data. We've hired up to 6 meteorologists that are on staff that keep track of weather patterns and try to ensure we have information on what weather might impact our grid in case we might have to send more resources to certain parts of the territory, or as we've started to do this year, preemptively shut off power in select areas in order to prevent wildfires. Now, we don't take it lightly as a power company that we might have to turn off your lights. However, public safety is of utmost importance to us. And San Marino does have a few high fire risk area circuits that have been on our list for the past year and a half. However, we do anticipate some may come off, given that after evaluating for a year and a half, we've deemed that some areas don't meet that risk threshold. In addition to our situational awareness, we are also very much focused on vegetation management. Annually, Edison inspects almost 1 million trees, and we prune 700 of those, 400,000 of which are in high fire risk areas. Now, this is a very important part of mitigating the risk of fire. The state has actually passed a new law that in the past it was you needed a 10-foot clearance from our lines, and this year it's actually a 12-foot clearance. And so you may have seen our crews out there more often pruning the trees to standards, but we do appreciate that partnership with cities to ensure that we're able to keep the community safe. In particular, there are instances where there's emergencies where you may have a dead or dying tree that's leaning or in danger of leaning into an electrical line. And so we do prefer to work with that expeditiously and try to manage that and take care of that tree beforehand, before any danger causes any danger. Moving on, there's some more information about our public safety power shutoff protocol. The main thing I want to express is that we have a notification timeline that we've put in place and have been using over the past year, 4 to 7 days ahead of what we think might be a weather event or potential fire event. We have meteorologists reviewing the data. They will notify our incident commander about 3 days ahead that we think these certain areas might be prone to fire. The incident commander will then assemble the team. Edison has trained a pool of employees who are trained in the FEMA incident management system. I'm one of those. I've been trained as an agency representative, so should the county EOC activate, I will go over there and be the partner agency representative. However, 2 days ahead of a potential PSPS event, we will notify the city, and then 2 hours later notify any potentially affected residents. And the way we notify is either by phone call, email, text. We do encourage customers to either call SCE or log into their My SCE account to set their notification preferences. You may have signed up for electrical service 20 years ago, your phone number may have changed, and so we ask you to please update your contact information so we can get in touch with you. Very quickly, going over to reliability. Basically, the definition of reliability is having dependable electricity when you need it, and there's 2 ways that we measure it, duration and frequency. So how often does the power go out unexpectedly, and how long does it last? For San Marino, if you move over to page 17 of your packet, we can see that the duration and the frequency of outages in San Marino is actually above the system-wide averages, and there are several reasons for that. If you move over to the next 2 pages, here in San Marino, 85% of outages that lead to the duration metric are due to equipment failure. So that, here the grid may be older here, and so, we need to put in more work fixing it. But then when you go over to frequency, you see that weather, fire / earthquakes, not really earthquakes, mostly weather and fire, they account for 20% of those reasons, as well as third party. Those are your car hit poles, your balloons, mylar balloons getting into the lines. So those are some of the reasons why we experience outages here. And then just some more information. On the next page, you see all the circuits within San Marino. It's hard to see here, but I can send a high definition file to the city, should you wish to see that. And then some of the work, the capital improvement plans, such as pole replacements and circuit rebuilds that we're doing in San Marino over the next year. And if you ever have any insomnia and you need something to help you fall asleep, you can dig into the data a little more in the backup slides. But I'm here to answer any questions. I also have my colleague Luis Morales from our vegetation management team, should you have questions about that as well. Thank you.
Question, anyone?
I do. I'm actually surprised that San Marino's reliability is substantially less. I mean, according to your information, our blackouts, for lack of a better term, last an hour longer than what our system average is, at least an hour longer, and are more frequent. Why, given your history in 2015 of having the same problem, is it still existing in 2018 if a lot of that is equipment failure? What has SCE done to update the equipment in San Marino so we are at least on par with everyone else?
Right, and so you're correct, the outages have been more frequent and longer. I am happy to have our district manager come out and speak with staff, specifically on what has been done in the city. This year they've been very, our resources have been spread thin in terms of the wildfire management. We've been inspecting more, we've had enhanced overhead inspections over the past year and remediation work. So that's been happening a lot. So with that being said, that is probably also going to contribute to improved numbers next year. However, there is one protocol that was put into place last year that might affect our numbers. Because some circuits in San Marino were considered high fire, whenever the power would go off, typically within 30 seconds, we have these automatic reclosers that turn on the power within 30 seconds if the line doesn't have any interruptions. However, because they were high fire risk circuits, we now have a new protocol that during certain times of the year, weather conditions, we will have someone actually go patrol the line and put some eyes on it to make sure that there isn't a palm frond further on down the line that if we re-energize it would catch fire. So that has led to increased outage duration over the past year. And that started in Q4 of last year. So that really raised some of our times in our high fire risk cities.
Well, I can imagine that high fire exists all over the place. I mean, certainly some cities don't have it, but if San Marino has a high fire district, I'm sure a lot of these others that do.
About 30% of our service territory has high fire circuits.
But more importantly, what I would like to know is what SCE plans to do to update its equipment in San Marino so that we fall below average instead of above average. And I think that would be something that information that would be much more valuable to me than to know what happened in 2015. Absolutely. What are you going to do to improve the service? Because we pay the same. In fact, I probably pay a lot more because I got too many people that like to leave the lights on. But it is troubling to me that it appears our equipment is being ignored, and that's just my statement. It's my opinion, and I'd like to know what SCE is going to do to change that.
Okay, I'm happy to bring that information to you.
We've got an older population, and a lot of times they're dependent upon their electricity for
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. That reminds me, Edison does have a medical baseline program where folks who are energy dependent for medical equipment or other medical needs, typically you just need a letter from your doctor, they can sign up for a lower rate with Edison, and it also puts you on the list. So in an event where there's an emergency or maybe a power shutoff, there's a special protocol where we will actually do a robocall to them. If they don't answer, there will be a live phone call to them. If they don't answer that, someone will knock on their door to make sure that they are aware of the potential outage or the potential situation and that they have a plan to get through it. So I did bring some of those applications.
What have you done to promote that?
It goes into onserts in our bills. There's other ways to get out there, and me bringing it to the city as well. And we could also send it, help put it on your website and newsletters, etc.
Thank you.
Yes.
I also had similar concerns as my colleague, and just in response to what you said, I mean, with an 85% average failure rate, and you look at us compared to other areas that are high fire, for example, in your chart, there's Thousand Oaks, which we know would definitely outrank us in the last year because they did have major fires, as well as Yucca Valley, Ridgecrest, and Blythe. They all had weather emergencies. So really, we're number one in the worst way. We
Yeah.
have the most power outages, so that's not acceptable. And then you said that it perhaps is due to our high fire areas, but I'm looking through the charts here, and since 2015, we've actually gotten worse in this equipment failure category. And now we have 8 circuits that have 100% or 92 or 84, all in the 80s and 90s of failure rates in the last year. That's in 2018. I'm sorry, last year. I'm not talking about this year. And I could say it happens quite frequently where I live. I can only imagine how bad it is in other areas. And it doesn't go out for minutes. It goes out for hours or days without any weather condition triggering it. So it really is a big problem, and I don't know if Edison is aware that having 8 circuits that have an 80% failure rate in our city last year is huge. We do, as you stated, have a huge amount of electrically dependent population, both our seniors and other people with special needs in our city, and I don't think this is acceptable at all. And the fact that rates continue to go up, and we're asked to foot the bill, and I look at the chart for your infrastructure improvements, and I see it is hard to make out from the diagram because it's fuzzy and reproduced, but I definitely don't see 8 things being repaired that are the circuits. So I would like a memo from whoever to the city council about that. I would appreciate more information, because the one thing about capital improvement plan, which we could cross-reference with the circuits that are failing repeatedly for the last 4 years in your statistics, this is not mine, I don't know what this means. This is irrelevant to me because it doesn't match up with the names that you've given to the circuits. And if we have 8 out of 12 or 13 circuits here that are failing more often than not, and most in the 80s and 90s percentile, that's huge for our community. And I think Edison is the exclusive provider. We don't have a lot of choices, but this is a responsibility that Edison has, is to keep our population safe.
Thank you so much for that. I will take that feedback and look into what type of information I can get back to you and the city. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo what my colleagues say. Moving into another area that you discussed, you talked about the clearance, now 12 feet for pruning. How do you decide on the schedule that you use in San Marino? And is there ongoing pruning? Is it certain months? How do you come up with the schedule?
Thank you. I will, wonderful. Bring up my colleague Luis, who can speak more to that.
And we're set on a schedule for month clearance. Especially, we'll also bring in a little bit on not only the structure failure, it's due to vegetation being so dense in this area. It's very difficult to come up with a lot of our 12-foot clearances. We're really, we go a lot of times back and forth with a lot of the residents in the area where we can't meet our clearances. But we do have a trim cycle that's actually coming up as of next week. We will be trimming in San Marino, on the northeast part of San Marino. I don't have the exact grid location, but we have communicated with Ron, I believe, where we've showed the areas where we're going to be coming up and trimming.
So when you say we go back and forth with the residents, what does that mean?
Not necessarily back and forth, it's just to maintain a certain clearance on vegetation for certain trees.
So,
I think one of the issues of concern is that sometimes residents won't really want us to go in and trim the trees. You know, we really love our trees and definitely want to keep it beautiful. However, there are some times where we will be denied access, and so sometimes that makes the timeline a little longer.
so a few questions from that. What do you do if there is a safety issue? And along those same lines, what can you do to reassure residents This city values the trees in the city and how they are carefully pruned. What can you do to comfort the residents that the people who will be doing this have been appropriately trained and sensitive to the issues of the trees?
So yeah, our vegetation management team, we have certified arborists on staff. And all of them are certified arborists, and we cut to the standards, ANSI standards. So they're all trained and they all follow the standards when it comes to trimming the trees.
Could we get Luis, your full name?
Luis Mireles.
Can you spell that?
Mireles. Morales.
And with that, do you give a copy of your schedule to the appropriate department heads of where you're going to be working?
Yes, so we've been working, I believe, with Ron, is that in the building, the planning and building department. And then I also communicate as well there is upcoming trimming going on, and so we've been communicating with that.
So going back to the safety issue, asking our department heads, if there is a refusal to come in and there is a concern, do we have any internal way of addressing that with the residents? I understand where they may be coming from, but how do we handle that if it is a safety issue?
Well, the best way to handle a situation where it's been deemed a hazardous condition and there is the reluctance of gaining access, we could certainly deem it a public nuisance situation where through that process we can gain access. It does result in a very timely process, but that's the only mechanism where we could access properties via public nuisance.
Do we ever contact the homeowner through the city, trying to see if they can comply, either bringing in their own crew or finding some way to be able to work with the folks who are coming out?
Well, it is my understanding that only Edison vendors can trim around power lines.
Because of the
safety issue,
safety
yeah,
issue,
absolutely.
correct.
We've had incidents where there have been
Well, I would really like, along these lines, if you would be so kind, if we could perhaps send out some educational material, letting folks know that we have people who are properly trained doing this.
Absolutely.
And to let us know if you get complaints afterwards about the work that's done so we can work together.
Yes, thank you. In your packets, I did include 2 brochures that we have available that I can bring to City Hall, and we can also provide an electronic format for residents. And it's also very helpful when we're able to partner with the city, especially in emergency situations. Sometimes the permitting process can be a little lengthy, and for public safety reasons, we hope that there's a way that we can work a little more expeditiously on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, first I want to thank you for coming and sharing the information. Can appreciate the financial pressures that Edison might be under these days because of the large fires, but I echo the concerns of the other councilmen. It's our expectation that our service be at or above standards, and it would be very helpful to see what your proactive preventative CapEx schedule looks like to replace a lot of our aging equipment.
Absolutely, thank you for that.
Great, yes, so please come back with answers so that way we can make some room better. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Next, new business. Approval of refinements to Metro Major R710 North project proposals and direct the city manager to review the project with Metro staff and submit a draft funding agreement when available.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Vice Mayor, and council members. On July 27th, the City Council directed the City Manager to return this month with refinements to the Measure R projects at the intersection of Atlantic, Garfield, Los Robles, Huntington, and improvements to the Huntington Drive corridor, including work related to the school sites. The City Council action requested this morning is so that the City Manager can begin the project review and eligibility process with Metro staff and bring back to you a funding agreement. The Council is well aware of the numerous public meetings hosted by the Department and your Public Safety Commission. We expect the refinements achieve Metro's 710 project goals related to traffic flow, addresses San Marino's safety concerns at the school sites, and can be paid for by other public money. I'm very appreciative of all the positive comments, ideas, and suggestions the department has received since last November, and I was very encouraged by their thoughtfulness and obvious interest in making travel through San Marino safer. I reviewed each suggestion, and they generally fell into two categories: work that might be Measure R eligible, or those that are on non-710 project streets. The ones that seem eligible are included in the maps before you today. The others were generally about local street intersection improvements and traffic calming, and I forwarded those to our traffic engineers for further study. Your Public Safety Commission hosted 2 public comment sessions since July, and their suggestions are also included in the projects. The Commission is recommending that you move forward with the projects. The traffic engineering work for projects 1 and 2 is very different than the work being undertaken by Arteris for the citywide traffic circulation study. That study will include very preliminary engineering solutions for non-Measure R intersections. The Measure R projects require highly focused and very detailed engineering work when compared to the citywide study. Projects 1 and 2 and the citywide circulation study are complementary and can be done in parallel without any loss of effort or additional expense. Next slide. Project 1 includes features intended to improve traffic flow and, perhaps most importantly for San Marino residents, control as much as possible northbound traffic flow into Los Robles and Garfield from Alhambra. We will be working with Alhambra and South Pasadena, whose cooperation is necessary to achieve this project. Project refinements include diverting northbound vehicles away from Garfield and Los Robles by adding left turn lanes on Atlantic, restricting left turns from Los Robles northbound onto Oak Street during commute hours, reclassifying Los Robles from a principal arterial to a minor arterial or a collector. This will result in a de-emphasis of that in the traffic modeling world. Eliminating the lane merge when northbound vehicles enter Garfield or Los Robles. Updating signal timing and upgrading all the traffic signal equipment and directional signage at all the intersections you see there. Resurfacing and restriping each intersection and refreshing all median landscaping. Next project. Project 2 encompasses the entire length of Huntington Drive in an effort to free up the number 3 lane for improved and efficient through travel by moving to the side the double parked during school hour vehicles. This will restore the number 3 through lane to its intended flow, which is Metro's goal for the corridor. Project's refinements from end to end include narrowing the 3 through lanes with edge striping in both directions from Los Robles to San Gabriel. It was suggested that we install temporary striping along Huntington Drive as an alternative in an effort to save money. After careful review, we chose not to include that suggestion because temporary traffic striping is not effective in changing driver behavior related to speed, and this option would not increase the size of the safety zone we have observed that's needed. Our recommendation for the school zones is to move the curbs back to the sidewalks because it will afford the greatest width of safety zone between that number 3 lane and the folks loading and unloading children at the school sites. Finally, upgrading and increasing the quantity of driver feedback signs, those that show your speed through the corridor, is recommended. Next slide. In the vicinity of the Huntington Drive schools, refinements include providing separate turn lanes from Huntington into the school driveways, providing merge lanes from the school driveways back onto Huntington, providing the loading zones with striped safety barrier between that zone and the adjacent through lane, providing curb extensions to separate the loading zone from those turning lanes and merges to create safer lane changes for drivers. School district officials speaking at the September 16th Public Safety Commission meeting supported upgrading the driver feedback signs along Huntington and supported the street configuration in this area. Next slide, please. At the high school, refinements include lengthening the median left turn lanes from Huntington into Winston and to Gainsborough, and providing a longer on-campus loading zone at the high school. The district said it is feasible to have an off-campus loading zone in front of the high school, which is shown as option 2 on that plan before you, provided that they can work out the details and look for funding. I've estimated the cost of this work in the neighborhood of $250,000. District officials speaking on September 16th asked that the City Council reserve Measure R funding for this option should it be made available. Next slide. In this area, the lane narrowing will end and join up with what we understand will be lane reduction by the county east of San Gabriel Boulevard. The next steps in this process include meeting with Metro staff to review each project and the features that are before you this morning. The city manager will provide to the council and to the Public Safety Commission any updates as to what goes on in those meetings. After eligibility is established, we will work with Metro staff to create a funding agreement that takes into account the request from the school district to potentially phase in improvements at the high school. When a draft funding agreement is ready, we will return to the council with a recommendation. At that time, the council could accept the terms and conditions of the agreement, offer adjustments or changes, or decline funding, and all work would cease. The council also at that time could decide to fund improvements on the high school site should you choose to do so. Next slide. What the city manager is recommending is that you approve the most possible features per project, including onto funding for as long as possible, and direct her to move forward with the Metro process. Thank you for your attention. This concludes, next slide. This concludes my staff report, and I'm available for questions.
Question, Councilmember Jacobowski.
Yes, thank you for your report. Thank you to the Public Safety Commission, and most important, thank you to the community. It was really wonderful that so many people came out and comfortably and vocally shared exactly what they felt we needed to do going forward. I have just a few quick questions. At what point would we expect, I see the next steps, but at what point, particularly with Project 1, would we plan on contacting the partner cities?
My plan is as soon as, if the council does approve going forward with that as having us in the lead, I would simultaneously reach out to Metro to start that discussion, as well as reach out to our partners, because we will need our partners in with Metro when we get to the point of starting to do design work.
Very soon.
Very soon.
Thank you. My second question, and I may be slightly misunderstanding, Project 2, Area A at Valentine and Huntington schools. I think you had stated that you would take that up to the sidewalk, correct?
That is correct.
Would there be a need for any additional curb height because of the closeness to pedestrians, should anyone step on the gas in a way as they're pulling out that would cause a safety issue? Have you looked at that issue?
Do you mean the curb on the south side?
Yes.
We could look at that. We can look at that, certainly. Generally, you want to keep within a certain curb height, 6 or 8 inches.
Understand.
Because after a point, the height itself becomes a barrier. If a car hits it, it can actually launch versus sort of stopping a car. We also have issues of accessibility. Over a certain height, people are not used to stepping higher, and that can create a tripping hazard.
And our curb heights do vary in town, don't they?
They're between 6 and 8 inches, except in those places for whatever drainage reasons back in the past, they're a little bit higher in order to keep the flow on the street.
Okay, so whatever would be the safest height to avoid that kind of situation would be looked at, correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tolt.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Throne, and thank you also to the Public Safety Commission and the residents for their participation in this project to date. Project number one, I do like the fact that it appears to lessen the traffic, or attempt to lessen the traffic on Los Robles. I'm not sure I really like the double right turn lane. Let's see, change to double right turn only with single through lane to northbound Los Robles. I understand that, but there's also, you're focusing some of the traffic onto Huntington as opposed to Los Robles. I guess that's just a necessary evil if we want to keep traffic off of Los Robles. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Here's what I would like to see with respect to this, and I know that this is, you're working with existing infrastructure here. You're working with the fact that there's the Pizza Hut delivery right there. What I would like to see, just for my own edification before I move on, and that is, what would happen if that were to be removed? If eminent domain would be used, what could you do there to even further enhance this intersection? And I don't know if maybe there's nothing you can do, maybe that's, but if there is, if you dream and you say, let's take out Pizza Hut and let's do something there, what can be done? And if nothing can be done, fine. I'm just looking for at all the alternatives. That's issue number one. Issue number two is I'm not clear on what's happening on, I guess it's project one, project two, on the second page of your presentation. The corridor refinements to Huntington Drive. I cannot tell what's happening from this. Could you go into a little more detail as to what you're looking to do with the San Diego to Los Robles?
Yes, Councilmember. I created this exhibit because the project actually is from Los Robles to San Gabriel Boulevard. That's the corridor. So in my going back to the the Public Safety Commission several times, I realized that it was important to show the entire corridor, and that along the entire corridor, the two main things that would be going on exclusive of the work at the school sites was lane narrowing from city limit to city limit and the driver feedback signs. So the intent of this exhibit is to show not only that there's work from beginning to end of Huntington, but also how the three school areas fit into that. Because I felt that my other exhibits had too much, they weren't clear enough to say, oh, by the way, this project also extends all the way over here. So that the intent of project two is the beginning to end of Huntington lane narrowing with driver feedback signs, and inside that you have the three school sites that there's more detail on.
Okay, I see that it's just, for example, project two, area A. Also, there's things in that were not in that project visual that you gave us that would need to be done to appropriately effectuate.
Yes, this fills in the blank in between the areas A, B, and C.
Okay. With respect to project two in front of Huntington and Valentine, if you look on the, I guess it's the south side of the street, you have little trees that you'll put in, and I guess that's to separate out the loading zone from the right turning lanes.
That's correct.
Won't we have backup as a result of those trees?
Well, what I wanted to do, just sort of like your Pizza Hut ideal, I'm hoping that, or not I'm hoping, is I think it would be nice that if you could squeeze in some landscaping, the best place to put it would be in that physical separation between the folks who are trying to merge or exit Huntington and those who are doing loading and unloading. The notion is if you keep all of that going in the same lane with just using striping, people generally will do what they want to do, but if there's a physical barrier that says, if you're merging back onto Huntington, you need to merge and to gauge your distance before you do that. So you need to employ more caution. If it looks like it's still part of the loading zone, then that's going to mix in with the folks who are trying to do loading and unloading. The same goes with as you're trying to make the turn in. You want to make sure that those folks who are turning in and have a definite place that they want to go is different from those who are just going to stop. So you'll see that I have a note there is that the traffic engineers will look at the length of the merges and the length of the turns in, design those first as to what the traffic data shows as being the appropriate lengths. Then what's ever left will be loading zone, and if we can squeeze in a tree and a curb, then that's the direction that we would want to go. So the idea is to have as much stuff to this plan as feasible that in the ideal world could happen, so that when Metro looks at it and gives it their blessing, it's included. If it doesn't occur, it would be because of the practical engineering portion of it. But if there's a possibility for it to occur and it's already been blessed by Metro, then they're going to be paying for it. Because as I was looking at this, by eliminating the green strip, you're eliminating any chance of doing any sort of plantings there. So I wanted to try to stick that in there as best we could.
So then nobody's gone out there and taken a look yet as to how many are doing the loading and how many are pulling in and using the turn lane.
The school district does have a report as to what they calculated, but we would go in and do something much more detailed using the Metro funding for that.
And then would you explain to me, just so that I could answer those questions, you spoke about the suggestion that we just paint the curbs and have a loading zone, temporary parking, whatever. Was that a safety issue? Did it not, was the determination, and who made the determination that that's not feasible?
If you go out and do the measurements, you can already see just by observation that the lanes at the edge are too narrow. And that's an observation that I've made as your city engineer. That's observations that people have shared with me. So when you look at the amount of spacing you should really have between where you're having people open up a car door and get out, you can see that in other places on Huntington, like in the business areas, you have that additional spot, that additional space, mostly for people to back out, but it's the equivalent argument. If you look here in front of the San Marino Center, if you ever sit in your car and feel the vehicles going past, that's the same condition as you currently have now. So in my expertise and judgment as your city engineer, if I have an extra 6 feet along the side that's landscaping, that I can pull all those vehicles over, I'm increasing that separation. The more separation you have between vehicles traveling at speed and those that are stopped, standing, loading, unloading, the better off you're going to be to avoid the conflicts that can occur. They don't occur now, but the reason why they may not be occurring is that people are slowing down in that number 3 lane. The goal of the Metro funding of the Huntington corridor is to restore the number 3 lane to its proper operation. So the way to do that in the analysis that I looked at is to move them over to the side as much as you can.
If you look at, well, as much as you can, I understand that.
Right.
But you look at what you intend to do under the page with the whole thing, and that is to change the striping, to narrow the lanes. Won't that serve as a solution to the problem of not having enough room?
You do gain some, but I'm looking to gain the maximum amount.
Make it safest as
To
possible.
make it as safe as possible. And if I leave a green strip and I tinker with the lanes and I try to keep it within the existing curb line, that would be more of a recommendation you would go to if you were limited in funding. But at this point, we have an angel investor, as it were, that is encouraging us to do everything that we can to spend funds to the maximum extent practicable. And it's my recommendation to you that we go as far as we can on this in order to make the maximum amount of safety.
Okay, thank you, Director.
Councilmember Bailey?
First of all, thank you for your patience and thick skin on this whole process, because this is one truly where you can't please all of the people all the time. And as you collected all the facts, is this what this is your best professional advice for the best long-term interests of the community?
Yes, it is. And I would actually like to echo Councilmember Talt's notion of purchasing the Pizza Hut. I have actually explored that with Metro. And that is a potential thing. That would be something that when we get the go-ahead from you and get the go-ahead from Metro, that's where we have a fairly good financial resource to look at the feasibility of that. Because really that is where you want to start, ideally, and then work your way back to this triangle that's, I was speaking with Mr. Rock, has been around for, well, since before I was born.
Well, that was going to be my concluding comment question, because I echo the same, interest in it. If you would remove that pizza triangle, what flexibility would the pizza slice? What flexibility would that give you? And as you're approaching this, don't just think about the Metro money by itself, but also look at if we, we're looking long term here. If we combine some of our resources to truly have a long-term solution, I think we'd be open to considering that.
That is definitely, that is, I think one might call that a stretch goal. And as I mentioned, I have explored this very tentatively with Metro. Their opinion is that if we underspend on one of our Metro projects and have some savings there, we could transfer that money to the other Metro project. The intersection project as configured does not include acquisition.
Okay.
And as I've already in my career done eminent domain on 2 Pizza Huts. Each one was the most profitable Pizza Hut in the universe, of course, always. And so I could foresee that with the scope of our Huntington projects that we would be in a positive cash flow perspective to transfer funds over if we wanted to go through an exercise like that. But again, that's where we would get to after Metro buys into Notion, after the council buys into the notion of doing this, and I have funding to really dig into it, an expensive engineering effort. And from that, then we can go through and not only do, here's ideal modeling, pretend that you've got no constraints, and then look at the constraints we have. Support from the council to go in that direction, we can certainly add that right in Councilmember Talt's ideal, as it were, and bring that to Metro as part of the program.
And I know council voted down any synchronization consideration. If we would reconsider that, would that give you more flexibility as you're talking about that intersection and potentially the pizza slice?
In terms of if you had savings from that project when it was done,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
certainly. One of the things that I envision for the triangle intersection, it may or may not be synchronized. It probably is. However, there's the much improved technologies that the 3 agencies that jointly own that intersection probably have not invested in, because the funding is just not available for that. And if you look at the intersection, it's been changed numerous times over the decades. Gina and I were talking about that. And it's just been pieced together. This is the opportunity to sort of say, okay, we we have a bucket full of money, what would work really well. That's also a very good carrot for us as the leaders of the project to be able to influence our colleagues in the other cities who might have wanted to do something, but they too only have a limited amount of capital expenditure.
Yeah. And since we voted, I've gotten information, and I'd like you to confirm this with the synchronization, that we, the city, would control the synchronization speed.
That's correct.
Okay. And the metro would not control the synchronization speed.
They would not.
Okay. So, when I think about the broader picture, if we would reconsider the synchronization, it might give us more or a larger war chest to put towards this total combined corridor to get us the best long-term solution.
As I understand it, the Metro Board has approved the changes in their allocations, and I do not believe there's any way to add any projects back in.
So that bus left the station?
That bus did leave the station after July.
Okay, that's a shame. And the Public Safety Commission is on board with your recommendations?
They are.
Okay. And is the school district on board with these recommendations?
Yes.
Okay. And then again, this is my understanding that this is the next bite of the apple and not the last bite of the apple, because you still need to go negotiate with Metro to see what they're truly willing to fund and then come back with a final proposal.
You still have several more bites at this apple. During the design process, you will also have the community and the council and the Public Safety Commission will also have participation in, because as we develop these designs, it's incumbent on me, and it's part of my personal professional process, is to make sure the community knows, okay, these are the sketchy things we talked about. Here's what the real details look like. Do you now have discrete particular features that you would like to add in or not? Because at the end of the day, the devil is in the details, and at this point we're at a high elevation as to conceptual wants, and when we get there will still be council and community involvement, and certainly at the end of the day, approving a construction contract is yet another place for you to put thumbs up or thumbs down. Just a caveat in that, and this might be the string attached, is any dollar we spend of Measure R that we ultimately decide that we want to reverse, we would owe Metro back that Measure R dollar.
Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you for your efforts, and if you need a Kevlar suit, let me know.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I was also curious in part, I think, and I still don't understand, though my colleagues have asked, your determination if a suggestion from the community was potentially eligible, is a phrase you used, that it was included in project 1 or 2, but that you made some sort of determination that some of the residents' suggestions were not eligible. And I think you also talk about this farther down, that after the July meeting, was that the public meeting, or was that the first one that our planning commission filtered through? The largest amount, I think, of people commented. I don't know what you're referring to.
That was your July 27th meeting.
Okay. And so I'm trying to understand, and maybe I need more explanation, because there were a lot of comments, and I know you probably are still hearing, but I think many of us are still hearing from the public that there were valid comments given, and they'd never made it into any of the plans, either the first proposals or subsequent revisions. And so I'm just trying to figure out who was making those determinations and how.
So I received many comments, both at commission meetings, at our public meetings, as well as emails. Every time I would publish a new set of concept drawings, I would get comments. The comments that were not on the Huntington corridor directly would not have been eligible for the Measure R funding, because they were not ones that would be seen as achieving.
I'm talking about ones on Huntington.
So the ones on Huntington, I did incorporate every single one. There were two I did not incorporate. One was to create a toll road on Huntington Drive. One was to restore the trolleys back there. I think those were great comments, but they're really not something that was going to fit into this. I did pick up every single comment. I did have my own personal tally of those, and they all did show up in one form or another. Some were merged in with others. The comments at the high school about changing the access in the front there, that did come out of public comment. And also discussion with the Public Safety Commission. And when I went and worked with the school district, they were like, ooh, that's not really going to work so great. So we looked at something else to do. But the comments you see are on these drawings are the ones that were directly relating to the Measure R dollars.
Okay, and to me, I had some questions as well, because I know that you've gotten a lot of things over, as you said, but I won't comment about the intersection, or don't have much questions about the intersection, except my question concerning that is about the pizza slice, or I believe other residents have called it the stinko, after the burger that used to be served at intersection, it used to be served at Tui's, that's no longer there. But in that intersection, and should we go forward with, was that project 1 today? And start that ball rolling. If that's an issue, is there a reason why we cannot ask for more money?
We can't ask for more money. Metro has.
Or cannot?
We cannot. Metro, at their, when the Metro staff took the projects to the board, they froze the dollar amounts. So this particular project is an $8 million budgeted project for now. As I mentioned, if there's any project savings in the Huntington project, which is budgeted at $6 million, we can transfer those funds over to this project. If this project starts to cost out at a larger value than $8 million, which it very well might if you look at property acquisition.
Right. And my concern or question there is, I think that they approved the South Pass at interchange where the freeway off-ramp is the one project that South Pass had in the first round approved, and that was tens of millions of dollars, as well as the one in Pasadena that had to do with an access, I believe, at California Boulevard and the Gold Line, and that's $100 million. So I find it really hard to believe that Metro wouldn't consider not borrowing from other funds that we may or may not go for, but why they're going to only allow $8 million for an intersection revision that involves 3 cities and tens of thousands of cars in a day. And I think there's no harm in asking, because this is all about mobility, and I don't understand why, if we're doing the things that are on the plan and previously approved, but it's going to cost out higher, why we would not approach them for more money at this time. I'm just throwing that out there and asking, because I know that they have round 2, which we did not submit anything for, and they denied many of those projects, but they're still going forward with some, so there's still a significant amount of money that needs to be spent, and this is exactly, in my mind, and I think most of the public's mind, where money should be spent, because this is a mess, and everybody that lives in the San Gabriel Valley knows that, pretty much. If you pass in that intersection, you know you got problems.
It's a mess in all directions. I think that's a very excellent comment and observation and request, Vice Mayor. What I can commit to do is, as we get this ball rolling and start really drilling into the cost estimate, is also start that discussion with Metro as to the potential of perhaps not this Measure R funding if they've frozen the dollar amounts, but maybe there's some other congestion management dollars out there. There's some federal aid that this might be potentially eligible for if there's the situation that could occur that the cost of the project exceeds the budget. When I did work with your Metro liaison, Mr. Suetsugu, in developing the cost estimate on this, and as long as it doesn't leave this room, we really estimated this project really, really well. I mean, well in that.
Enough said.
Enough said. And you know that I really don't like to give out numbers, but this is a really nice number. But there are certainly other funding sources if we see this, and also we also have the easier money, if we wind up being under with the Huntington project, that is very easy dollars to transfer over in that it's still within the same family of funds, and it has basically the same low level of strings attached to it. If you go to the other outside fundings, now you're involved in a lot of other federal and state rigmarole, which is really where the strings are attached.
Well, is there a plan to submit any more projects in further rounds of Metro R?
Currently, I'm not aware that they're entertaining, but as soon as they do, we will start looking at our needs. One of the great benefits of your long-term capital improvement program that you initiated last year is that we have a list of projects.
Right, but I'm saying, why couldn't you, for example, when, I know, I don't want to go into it, but I know that Metro Board met yesterday, very controversially about some of their project approvals and denials in round 2, and so I'm aware that there is, again, tens of millions of dollars, if not $100 million, sitting there. So why would we not approach again on this particular project? Not other things, not borrowing from something that we're not possibly doing or may not have money left over when you add in all the sites that work that we want to do. Again, I think it's a conservative amount to do the amount of work that needs to be done in front of the school sites and on Huntington, particularly if it's going to do some of this engineering, major engineering work. So I just want you to consider that if you would. So that's my ask.
I
if
will.
There's a way,
Yes.
not federal, not state, but to go back to Metro and get money that's needed for this intersection, because I think I understand that you and Hal have put in a great deal of time, and I know the Planning Commission has, and I thank you all. But if we're trying to really make this work, then I think we should do it right, and we should ask them for more to make it work. And I know the residents, some would support that as being something that we, our alignment with Metro's needs falls in that intersection that some people have spoken about that we really need to focus on. And about the schools, I know you're not going to like this, but I'm just going to throw it out there. This is a question. Can you pass that to him? And we'll go down. This is a picture, and you'll see of something that's done of the street treatments in Pasadena. It's okay. I'm not familiar with it. I think I took it from my car the other day. But the ability to have, shh. The chief didn't hear you. I'm okay. I was not driving. I was fully stopped. So the idea is... You're not helping. Okay, I'm sorry. So the idea would be that, because I think it comes down to the school sites, you know, the public safety and the children's safety, mobility, is that we're not having children in cars pull out dangerously into oncoming traffic. That is going 40 plus miles an hour, I will say on the record, though we know that speeds can often get higher, even when children are present. So I appreciate a lot of the things that you're doing with that, but I think that, or I ask you, have you considered some other barriers? If we're going to be taking out the landscaping on the school side, if that's what the council and the community and planning commission, et cetera, is supporting, I'm just curious as to why we don't actually put in a barrier that is going to be safer for our kids, because we know that, like, for example, at the high school, we're now going to be having cars go onto the campus, and, well, I mean, in theory, if this is a part of it is approved, or the whole thing is approved. And so we're taking those kids out of harm's way, and essentially the cars from pulling out, you know, it is what is safe. You have a line and you all proceed through the line, you know, 5 kids get in and then they leave, and then 5 pull up, excuse me, or whatever. But we're not still able to do that really in your plan, because we're now taking apart the area on Huntington in front of Valentine, and we have the 2 pull-ins, and we have that pull-in that goes between Huntington and middle school. So we got a lot going on there. And without really making a barricade or something, I don't think that we're those changes. So have you considered that? And I thought there were, if not trees, in my picture, of course, so everybody knows there's a trees in a small planter that distinguishes a street from a lane from the curb or sidewalk. But anyway, but I thought that things like this were suggested by the community, maybe not trees, but barriers or something to keep the cars from pulling out too soon and people from getting out on the traffic side and pulling into oncoming traffic. Then that didn't make it into the plan, and I'm just trying to figure out, that was part of my questions before, where those recommendations, let's say, from the community went.
So in this particular photograph, you're showing a raised planted median between the travel lane and then whatever's going on along the side there, which
I think it's a
could be
bike
parking or a bike lane.
Yeah.
One of the things that was looked at was trying to ensure as much safety as possible. And so when you have any sort of raised barrier, that creates a hazard or a situation from the drivers that are going through and the drivers that are along the side doing loading and unloading. To have this sort of barrier, you would need more than a single lane at the loading zone area, unless that loading zone was being monitored as an airport-style drop-off pickup, where there was someone there saying, cars gotta move, cars gotta move. Because of the width of the right-of-way between the median and where the sidewalk is, you have a certain fixed amount. If you're to put a raised barrier, whether it's planted or hardscape or whatever, there's not enough space to have the 3 through lanes, a raised median, to call it anything else, and then 2 more lanes. Because you will need a lane for those who are parked and those who want to go through, unless you're having someone there saying you can't stop, you have to move through all the time. So when you look at the width that you really don't have enough space to do both of those things, is to have a raised area and to have basically a drive aisle and a parking area. So if you make that, so then the thought went back to, all right, well, if we want to have a barrier in between, it needs to be striped, because there's really not going to be any real control over the drivers who are dropping off kids or picking them up, for them to sort of jump back in the number 3 lane. So it's not enough width to do everything that you want, but it is enough width to create as much of a separation between the loading zone, those folks who are either slow moving or stopped, and those who are trying to travel at the posted speed limit or less. So I love this idea. My compromise on that was the bulb outs with the trees.
And so, just out of curiosity, if we are reducing the lane sizes, I see at various places, what will throughout, like on your corridor refinements, is it continue, I'm just talking about on the first page of that, it says 2 10-foot wide and 1 12-foot through lanes? Are those on both sides and continue at those widths throughout?
Yes.
And so, why would we have a 12-foot lane anywhere? Again, we're trying to, with the mind of, we're trying to get this flow and parking to work and the merging. We got a lot going on, especially in front of Huntington and, I'm sorry, Valentine and Huntington, right? Of people coming in and out of those driveways, and as you described, whatever the treatment is for the loading zone. And so I'm trying to figure out, why would you leave it 12?
Generally speaking, your outside lane is also the lane that people who cycle use. And so you need to have extra width always on the outside lane. So even if you had 12-foot lanes, right, your outside lane would be 14 or 15 feet to accommodate cyclists. The vehicle code now requires that you give cyclists a 3-foot safety zone around them when you drive, and inside of the 10-foot lane, that's not enough. You would definitely cross over into the other lane that's going in the same direction. So 12 is sort of the minimum amount of extra part of lane for cyclists. Because pretty much the entire length of Huntington also has a parking lane off to the side. That's why you can go with a little bit narrower than a 3-foot additional increase to that final lane. That edge line also will create a visual corridor for drivers because currently there is no edge line at the number 3 lane, and it looks like you've got an extra wide lane to go really fast on and do whatever it is you want to do. So again, it's sort of narrowing the driver's vision in their want to stay in a lane. For them to want to stay in the lane, they're going to have to drive a little bit slower. So we're really affecting a speed change in a very subtle way, but you definitely want to have that at the edge. And again, you need the extra width so that the bicycles can remain in the traveled way, because they're not supposed to be riding their bicycles in a parking lane, because that's dangerous for them.
And what's the minimum that you can have for a lane of traffic?
10 feet.
Sorry. And concerning the high school plan, I was unclear as to some of the things, but I don't know if we want to go into it now. I don't know if it's worth it, so I'll let my colleagues decide more.
A couple of questions for Atlantic going northbound, having 2 right turn lanes, would that direct more traffic to our city? Would it be better to have, being selfish, would it be better to have 2 left turns going westbound?
What I show is for Garfield as it intersects Huntington Drive going north. There would be, in our ideal, is to have a double left going west toward Fair Oaks. But when you're on Atlantic and you're wanting to go in a northbound direction, I want to really dissuade you from going north as much as possible. Currently, the lane configuration northbound is a through right, and a right. So if we make a left, a through, and a double right, then it makes it more, so people could still turn left if they want to, which they currently are not able to do. So it gives them another direction to go, because we don't want them to go north on Robles. So by making it as difficult as possible, it'll push the people that want to get from A to B as quick as possible to go to the easier routes. So making that through right and right to a double right. So I've already eliminated 1 lane going north that way and adding a left to convey you to go toward Fair Oaks. You'll have to sit a long time to wait for that through lane to get up there, and you make it more inconvenient. So you're really pushing the traffic that is the commuter traffic that wants to go somewhere away from our neighborhood street. But it does have to go somewhere, unfortunately.
I think it's better with 2 left turns, 1 through, 1 right, and 1 foot in and out. So then my second question is, since you mentioned about that Pizza Hut place, just curious, what would you do if you ever if you can ever purchase that place? What would you do with that land?
Oh, this is a fabulous intersection for a monster traffic circle. But I think that's probably a little bit too far than stretch. I have worked intersections like this previously in my career. They get very complex, and because what you have is people that want to go opposite directions. And so the compromise on this intersection is kind of sort of splits at the Pizza Hut. You can kind of get the alternate directions, or the folks that want to cross. I think if you bring it all together, you're going to have to do a lot of staging of cars further south toward Pine Street to get vehicles to get in the right lanes so that they don't realize that they've made a mistake by you not letting them know that they're going to make a mistake. And so what I would envision that as part of the engineering for this is first you look at the existing conditions, and then you start doing all of this what-if traffic modeling. And you do a what-if you keep the Pizza Hut triangle, and what if you don't? And you unleash the engineers on that, and you may come up with a very fabulous, I don't want to say urban interchange, but basically that's what the concept of it, kind of thought process it is, because you're taking northbound flows and you're trying to get it at a T intersection to go east and west on another principal
We
arterial.
just want east.
We want away. I think it's west as much as possible. And so this actually becomes a really, really interesting engineering project, and I'm very excited about it because we've got some financial backup to actually at least look at these things, maybe cure some things that have been going on since Mr. Rusk was a teenager kind of thing, and really maybe put a capstone to this and to cure a lot of problems for all three communities and the neighborhoods.
I have one follow-up. As far as our, in Terrace, is that their name? The traffic.
Terrace, yes.
Terrace, sorry. I thought, and that council's direction was that they would consider and these areas as well and give us recommendations in that regard, instead of, for example, doing a projection of traffic out to 2035 or 2045. Am I mistaken in that?
No, they are going to be looking at the city in the short term. That was the council direction. And so they're looking at, when they're through with their circulation analysis, looking at over the next 5 years what sort of improvements can be made to intersections other than this particular one. But all the
Other than which
other
particular?
than these Pizza Hut intersections.
Okay.
They have dozens of intersections that they are studying and taking their counts on, and will be making recommendations to us. So that work is ongoing. It started last month with traffic counts and
Right.
whatnot.
Okay, so that does involve intersections along the Huntington corridor.
Yes, it does.
And are they going to weigh in on any of these proposals?
We can certainly have them weigh in. I would like to use the Metro money to do all the detailed engineering. They'll be able to give us basically a peer review of these suggestions to make sure that they're fitting into what they see as the 5-year plan. But really, as the work on Huntington is really at the school sites, is in between intersections, except at the high school where there is the suggestion by the community that those left turns be lengthened, and that can be something that's been studied, I believe, in some other of the
Yeah,
traffic
there's a school
reports.
safety corridor. I
The
know
school
that
safety corridor
school
looked at
district
it, the Huntington Safe Routes corridor looked at a bunch of those intersections. We've got a lot of data on those. Terrace has that so that they do not have to reinvent the wheel. All they need to do is just look at it and see if those suggestions are still conforming to what the traffic conditions are today.
All right, so are they looking at these specific projects?
They will be once these become projects that we're going to move forward with. Once you say go ahead with the refinements, we start talking with Metro, then I can involve them in the discussions of it at the technical level.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that the Metro representative at one of the community meetings specifically said that Metro money cannot pay for studies or engineering work or propose studies. They're meant to be they're meant to fund building projects or projects, work, as opposed to studies.
They did say that, and that was in reference to, we had submitted a project to do a citywide traffic circulation study in order to see where we can work on different intersections. They said that they would not fund that sort of work, but engineering work specifically for a Metro project, they would fund.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions before I open? Okay. All right, sorry, we have to take a 5 minutes break. Will Ms. Julie Boucher please come up? Keep it to 3 minutes if possible. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning. My name is Julie Boucher. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services for the San Marino Unified School District. Thank you, Mayor Wong, City Council members, City Manager Marlowe, and Public Works Director and Engineer, Mr. Michael Stone, for your thoughtful consideration on including projects in the city's Measure R grant that would help ease the traffic and congestion. This is like a work in and around our schools. As have been noted previously, on September 9th, Dr. Jeff Wilson, the superintendent, and I met with City Manager Marlowe and Public Works Director, Mr. Throne, to review those projects that would be near and adjacent to the San Marino schools. On September 16th, I provided comments to the Public Safety Commission based on behalf of the school district. The San Marino School District would welcome the electronic speed limit signs that would be adjusted automatically for our local schools' drop-off and pickup. We've carefully reviewed the projects along Huntington Drive, along at Carver Elementary School, Valentine Elementary, and Huntington Middle School, and we concur and agree with the city staff's recommendation for those projects adjacent to our schools. In terms of San Marino High School, we are very interested in evaluating option 2 with the city staff. It provides for more queuing in front of the school and drop-off and pickup of students. This option would require an investment on the school district's behalf, and we would have to evaluate that and determine an available funding source. In summary, the district agrees with the city's recommendation and the staff's recommendation to approve the refinement of the Measure R Metro project proposals, particularly as it relates to the projects near and adjacent to the San Marino schools. I want to thank the council and the city manager and Mr. Throne.
Thank you. Next, Mrs. Stephanie Johnson.
Stephanie Johnson, 1920 Los Robles. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm pleased with this plan. I just wanted, in listening to the discussion earlier, I just had a few comments, and that I believe you've already reviewed. But there are two call-out boxes on the plan for Los Robles, the big intersection, and one of them is for a left turn lane on Atlantic, at the Pizza Hut, and then there's another box that says 2 right turn lanes. Right now there are 3 lanes. So our preference is that there would be a left turn lane, 1 northbound lane, 1 right turn lane there. I don't believe as it's set up there would be room even to put a 4th lane there. So that was a comment. Regarding the Pizza Hut slice here, there are in the SR 710 EIR, they have already done studies because there was a mobility plan that involved buses and public transportation, and they do have some designs already that eliminate this Pizza Hut and use that area, so that would be a source to check for the engineering. The other thing that concerns me with this, and we're very hopeful that this can happen, is that we really need your help to make this work. Because I feel, having been involved with these traffic issues for like 20 years now, if you leave it up to the staff to deal with the other cities, they're not going to have the same level of influence, of course, as the council will. So the council really needs to get behind this project politically with Alhambra and South Pasadena to bring these cities together. And then I think together especially for this eminent domain, that you would have much more influence with Metro. I think it's probably something Metro would be interested in because they do have their own plans in this way. So those are my comments, and again, I'm hopeful that we can provide some relief on Los Robles and Garfield and really the other adjacent streets with this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. House Suesigu.
Thank you. House Suesigu, 2530 Sycamore Drive. I want to applaud the City Council and the staff for trudging through this whole issue and coming out with a very positive outcome. I think that Stephanie's comment is spot on. I think once we embrace this, the city needs to go and collaborate with the cities of Alhambra and South Pasadena. I think without that, you're not going to get anywhere. There needs to be cooperation between the three of them. And I believe that the discussion of this Atlantic and Garfield and Huntington has already been talked about, but politically it wasn't something of the meeting of the minds. I think now is a good time that we could attempt that, and I think with the City Council behind it and the Alhambra and South Pass City Council behind it, staff will move forward to a viable solution. As far as the school district and the project along the schools, I do recommend definitely that you continue that dialogue between the school district and the city. It's really the school district that had the institutional knowledge of what's going on in front of the schools and at some of the intersections there to work closely, maybe even do a joint planning meetings for just collaborating with them. I think that the school district is definitely in favor of this, and I think with their help we can get a solution started and completed. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next is Dr. Raymond Kwan, and I understand that Ms. Xinyan Huang and Chair Bol will give their time to Dr. Kwan. I'm sorry? Yes.
I have a lot of items. I'll try to take them a bit more in order. For example, I went to the South Pasadena Freeway and Transportation Commission meeting last Monday, spoke to Councilman Rick Schneider, who's their liaison. He reiterated he is happy to talk to our city manager and our council liaison, although he mentioned Alhambra, Binquist, who I ironically saw yesterday, but I couldn't get her attention, and Councilman Mejia. So that's still on the up and up. I've been to many meetings. I went to the Planning and Programming Committee for Metro. That was last Wednesday. I went to yesterday's full Metro board meeting, and here's what I learned. Yes, the funds for the traffic signal sync on San Gabriel and Huntington, as well as the Sierra Madre projects, are now listed as withdrawn. And Abdullah Ansari said that those funds have already been allocated elsewhere. I spoke on another topic to the Metro Board, and when I said I was a resident of San Marino, Supervisor Barger took interest, and she sent her transportation deputy David Perry to meet with me, and I've been trying to meet that guy for like 2 years. So that was kind of good. I'll tell you what we talked about. Let's see, funding. The notice of determination, that's the California CEQA passing, that went, and the federal record of determination has been done. It was done in August. So now we can go full funding. Now here's what Abdullah Ansari said yesterday about funding and building, that we have to hurry. And part of the pressure is the big Metro Measure M projects are coming up. And once they get underway, we won't be able to find a contractor who will want to do it, because these are all small projects. So he's urging all of the cities to hurry it up, because if we don't, we'll be caught in competition with major projects,
and they'll raise the prices for us. And they said, once they have funded us with a number, they will not increase it because we're having inflation problems. The city would have to fund the difference. So in Director Throne and Hal Sutsugu's utter great foresight, they get generous budgets, so maybe hopefully we can use that as a cushion against inflation, or artificial inflation because of competition for work. If you put together a bunch of little bits and pieces of information, there is metro money, as Councilman Romy said. For example, South Pasadena, the hook ramp, they have a hook ramp project that was always slated as being $32 million, but on Monday's meeting, they got the budget up to $80 million. So there's money out there. On the first round of approval, the last second, Mayor McGee, who was the mayor at the time, he did some kind of deal behind the scenes, and he got $100 million at the last minute for their ramp, for their, sorry, not the ramp, the stub. Okay? Well, that is now completely in limbo. I mean, they're not going to touch that until 2024 by their own guidelines, and that money is in limbo. So we don't know what's going to happen to that. That's money out there. What else? Studies. They said they won't fund studies. I heard Abdullah say that himself. But we've heard that they are funding Alhambra's stub study. They want money to do a study to find out the impacts of getting rid of the stub or limiting it. And we heard that Metro is funding that study. So there's a lot of hanky-panky going on there. Also, CEO of Washington, he's the CEO of Metro, he spoke yesterday, and he said there's this unnamed city that is just kind of way behind everybody else. They haven't even submitted any projects yet. So obviously, they're not on the round one list, and yet he said they're just waiting for them to further develop and turn in the paperwork, and he said there was money for them, that they're holding it. Okay? They did not name the city. So little bits of information, there's money out there, okay? And then this is maybe real secret. The transportation deputy told me they're not too happy about the signal sync. And he said that they could find other monies if we, having learned other things, and they could call it management of our, rather than signal sync, anyway. I'm gonna meet with him later. We ran out of time, but there is money out there. What else? We did submit 2 active transportation projects. I have it on a list, okay, for round 2. And Del Mar Complete Streets Improvements and Huntington Drive Complete Streets Improvements, $2 million each. It's immaterial now. They didn't fund any of the active transportation projects, and they're getting a lot of flack from community for not doing that. They promised there would be more in round 2, and then they just changed their minds and didn't fund any of them. Ironically, they funded a bunch for LA City and LA County because they bifurcated the decisions. So that's very strange. And I have one last thing. This is important. Does anybody know about the Caltrans? They're proposing an environmental impact report regarding the SR 110 Oro Seco Parkway Safety and Operational Enhancement Project. Okay? They're saying there's too many accidents on the Pasadena Freeway because of the designs from 1940. And they want to initiate a study to see if they can make it safer. And there's 5 options. One is a no-build, and another one is one is just change the speed limit, but 3 out of the 5 options, meaning severely limiting or completely limiting access to the 3rd lane, the slow lane. They basically, one of the proposals is to make it a 2-lane freeway. And I think that has major impacts in our city because, frankly, I tell you what, I check the traffic. If the Pasadena Freeway is blocked, I go south on the surface streets. And you imagine you go on a Glenarm and maybe you check your traffic thing, oh my gosh, it's so blocked up. I'm going to turn left on Marengo. I'm going to turn left on Los Robles. And eventually get down to El Molino. It's going to severely affect our traffic if they do that. And that's one of the options, completely close forever, the 3rd lane. can you imagine the capacity problem? Right now, if you leave at the wrong time, that traffic, towards Elysian Park is way backed up. And now imagine 50% more backed up because they got 3 lanes to 2. Imagine there's an accident, even a single lane accident. Now you got down to 1 lane. And people just gonna, what's Waze gonna do? It's gonna say, don't go down the Pasadena freeway and go down. So we're trading capacity and impact on our streets for some safety. And I'm sorry, those people get into accidents are idiots, right? They're going too fast. They tailgate, they're on their phones, and they have a rear ender. So I hate to say I prefer capacity over safety, but this is a case, it would so severely impact, particularly Los Robles, that I would be against it. I strongly suggest someone from the city and the staff attend the meeting. There's a meeting, the first meeting for scoping is Monday, this coming Monday, at, where is it? Ramona Hall Community Center. It's at the south end of the freeway, just on Figueroa, and it is from, I'm sorry, this copy is very blurry, 6 to 8 p.m. I'm planning on going to that. There's a written comment period that closes October 24th, and that's it. Once it closes, all of our input's going to be over. So I strongly recommend we have a big input on that project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rock? Please. And please fill out the form afterward.
Yeah, I just want to speak briefly concerning gentleman's discussion of the Arroyo. That originally was one of the first freeways in California. It was designed as a parkway with open green space between the lanes, but the main thing about it, it was designed with what they call a circular curve. And that later was subsequently, from an engineering standpoint, on all freeways designed what we call a long tangent. So the problems with the traffic on the freeway over there are heavily created by the circular curves. I just want to talk a minute about the situation over at Atlantic, and we talked about this before, that was once the major major traffic connection between Pasadena and Long Beach before the freeway was put in, that and the Rosemead Boulevard. And that street was much more narrow. In 1962, between Alhambra Road and Huntington Drive, it was widened. And in the process, they picked up a lot more traffic, and also at the intersection there was a popular drive-in called The Breeze, which was later converted into Tui's Restaurant and the In-N-Out. And the In-N-Out was largely negotiated with Gene Dryden and one of the people over in the council in Alhambra, because they desperately wanted that because of the sales tax revenue. And at that time, the Bean Track is one of the more politically powerful groups in Alhambra. And we had this Myers-Mojadas traffic study done between Alhambra and San Marino. And one of the projects was Atlantic Boulevard, and Los Robles, one of the other ones was Granada Avenue. And we experienced a situation where the political powers in the Bean Track put four-way stops on all the intersections in the Bean Track, and they closed all the exits on the north side between the side streets and Huntington Drive. So Gene Dryden went over and negotiated with them, and they basically agreed to open the intersection again if we would not challenge their drive-in for the In-N-Out hamburger joint over there, which they wanted for a revenue source. So when the process was in progress there, our traffic on Granada went up from about 3,000 cars a day to about 7,000 to 8,000. And of course, when it was opened, it dropped back down, and then we got the Granada Avenue improvements in, which were part of the Myers-Mojadas report. But Los Robles was struck down because they wanted some changes to the Myers-Mojadas, and the process resulted in the city of San Marino demanding that the people put in an environmental impact report, which would have cost the residents $50,000. So that killed the Myers-Mojadas project as far as the improvements on Los Robles north of Huntington Drive. And that's one of the reasons we still have a problem up there. But one of the things I wanted to mention in particular was that Atlantic Boulevard in Alhambra is designed with the east side as an R3 traffic zone. I mean, residential housing zone. And as a result, a lot of the houses are being converted into R3 projects. The city of Alhambra has that thing set up for further widening on the east side. And you cannot build anything on the east side without having a setback to provide for that at this point in time. And if you drive down there and you see where some of the houses have been converted to R3 projects, you'll see that the housing is all set back. And the reason for that is because that is still an active thing in Alhambra, and we don't know if we can trust them, because they do some weird things over there. And that is a very strong possibility that they may want to do something. But ultimately, there was a drive-in up there. It was LaBreeze. It was converted over into other projects with the Tui's restaurant and what is now the In-N-Out hamburger joint. And in the process, of course, they have this provision for further widening of Atlantic Boulevard, so I think you need to know what they're going to do. The city manager over there formerly was a San Marino employee. She worked here for 13 years, and she would probably be able to tell you what they got planned over there. I know one of the plans is, of course, for a big expansion at the intersection of the end of the 710 and Valley Boulevard. But that's still farther south. They have at various times discussed extending that freeway up as far as Huntington Drive, and in any case as far as Mission. So you got to know what they're really planning on doing, because they got quite a bit of money over there from this metro project. But anyway, I wanted to just point out that provision is still in there for further widening in Alhambra on Atlantic Boulevard, I'm sorry. And you should be aware of what they really plan on doing long range in that area, because it can have an effect on what you plan on doing if you want to take over the Pizza Hut and do some other things up at the other end of the street. It may have a strong bearing on it. So I suggest that you might want to review in detail what Alhambra's really got planned. That's what I wanted to say, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion. Final call, okay. Comments, Councilmember Udi?
Yeah, thank you. I again appreciate the work that staff has done on this and the public's input, and I support us taking the next bite of the apple. During the public comments, so I kind of put a question to us: do we want a council liaison to work with Mr. Kwan? And I said, thank you very much for all the legwork you're doing on our behalf, because it sounds like there could be some huge shifts going on, and if we don't, work with staff and take advantage of Mr. Kwan's personal interest in this, we might miss something. So I just kind of put that out to the council, interested in your comments as we all pipe up here.
Councilmember Toll?
But I agree that we should take the next bite of the apple, but I want to say two things. First of all, cooperating with our cities is something that we would love to do. Our local cities, however, as Mr. Rupp pointed out, Alhambra, who somehow chose years ago to put all its density next to Huntington as opposed to Valley, they've created some of their own problems and would like us to take care of them, and so we have to be careful in dealing with them. And South Pasadena likes to tell us what to do. So we need to be very careful when indeed we do start this cooperation, and that is that there's a lot of ulterior motives that are not necessarily out front, but certainly suggest there. I'm willing to cooperate. I hope we can cooperate, but we have to be very careful in our cooperation with them. Secondly, I think, as Raymond Kwan pointed out, one of the things that people are very suspicious about in town is Metro. There are people that are very concerned about Metro telling us what to do as opposed to us choosing what to do. So when we get closer to the actual agreements. I would like substantial lead time on any agreements, to review any agreements that we execute, or that we propose to execute with Metro, so that we can assure ourselves that these concerns do not become a reality. Otherwise, I'm in favor. I do think we should move forward, and I do appreciate the Public Safety Commission and staff work on this. But when we move forward, we got to move forward eyes open and very carefully.
Councilmember Chakabowski.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with all the input to date, and I appreciate the ongoing work of Dr. Kwan. I think today he brought up two issues that are very important to me and talked about the Metro dollars that are available. I regret now, having made plans a year ago and missing the initial July vote on this, because I probably would have voted in an abundance of acceptance to accept all the Metro dollars and let us eliminate each project as we saw fit. I think it might be helpful to direct staff to look at that synchronization issue if it can benefit what we are putting forward, and absolutely to see if there are extra dollars available so that we might be able to be more ambitious with that corner. I echo everything that's been said about our partner cities. What we are proposing for Atlantic and Garfield looks good for San Marino. There may be some kind of compromise ahead. I hope that we can have a good relationship. I think that's going to have to be very carefully approached, and I like Councilman Udi's idea of a liaison. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Maybe we can get some clarification. I think that we do have, because we have tried to schedule the meetings that we've just have been brought up here. Councilmember Talt and I have been traffic liaisons initially in the phase of developing these projects and trying to be open and transparent with the community, as well as during the summer there were overtures made by South Pass, I believe in particular, but I'm sure City Manager Marlowe can clarify where we stand with those.
I would be delighted, Vice Mayor. It is true that the liaison, to go back completely, the liaison appointed excuse me, by the council initially was Hal Switsugu to work with staff to develop the proposals. Once we did all of that work and worked through the proposals and submitted them, Hal has been very helpful in some ongoing advisement, but then once we started working with the actual projects, that shifted over to the liaisons for the Public Safety Commission, which, as you noted, is yourself and Councilmember Talt. So at the moment, the two of you are the liaisons on this issue, selected by the council as a result of your experience with the Public Safety Commission. On the second issue, in terms of meetings, we have been, overtures have been made to us by South Pass in a variety of ways. The most recent way was actually an official request to meet that came to me from their city manager, and the request for that meeting was, would there be interest in having two council members from each of the three cities being us, of course, South Pass and Alhambra, to sit down and discuss this. And the request from South Pasadena was that be an elected official meeting only without staff present, so that there could be a discussion without staff presence. And so in response to that, I did check with the two liaisons. Both of you indicated that you would be willing to have that conversation, and I communicated that back to South Pasadena, and we have heard nothing since then. So that is where we stand.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. So we are trying to hold those meetings, and that is definitely of interest, I think, especially because going forward with that major intersection that I think people are anxious to have some better solutions. I feel strongly that we have that meeting and that we proceed with that. With the one notation, I will say that again and again, I agree with, I believe it's Mrs. Johnson has pointed out, Ms. Johnson has brought to us that that particular turn that is the northbound lane of Atlantic as it approaches Huntington should not have two rights. It should have a left. it should have a through and it should have a right, because right now there are 3 lanes there, and I think that that makes the most sense and would help with the traffic, because now we would be able to send some of that westbound. I'm going to say, get my geography right, which is what's needed there, and we would have 1 through. And if those people that are trying to go through have to wait, then that's just the way it is. But it would not, in my mind, and so I'm asking my other council members if you would support that particular change, because I really think that we need to go forward with a solid plan about that intersection. And I strongly believe that the residents have made good suggestions, and that's one of them that did not make it, or maybe it was talked about and it's still not appearing here. So not to create 4, just get rid of the 2 right-hand lanes and make it 3 lanes, each dedicated in a direction. And I think that would improve that plan, and I can support it. My personal feeling is that there needs to be significant work in front of the schools. Still, I don't think that the plan in front of Valentine and Huntington with the trees and the way that it's projected now, for me is a go. But I don't know, so this is going to be my problem, is if I could support this, because I don't agree with it how it's currently configured, and I'm trying to figure out, and I don't really have an answer, if we go with this plan and they fund this plan, and then we have some more work done, and there's traffic flow issues with how it is, or for example, some of the work does require school district participation, and I'm so thankful for Superintendent Boucher's comments today, as well as Mr. Sutsugi, who's involved there as well with their infrastructure. But if some of the funds aren't there to do, then some of these things will fall away, and we can eliminate things, or are we stuck with funding it as it appears here in front? So I'm still not really 100% clear, because that would determine whether I could, and I should have asked it before, but whether I could support the school plans. So sorry, I'm questioning again.
That's perfectly okay, because I want you to feel very comfortable about what it is that you're going to do. What we tried to do was to stick everything we could on these drawings so that we would know that this is the maximum amount of our ask, and then see where it goes. Because not knowing exactly what will go, because they really have not published any defined criteria, we decided to throw everything at it. So one of your suggestions at the Valentine area was, because you did have questions about the barrier or the separation between the number 3 lane and loading zone, we can certainly amend that little box that says striped to something that gives us more flexibility if it works out. The same goes with the Pizza Hut triangle, just putting a note there that says explore the possibility of acquiring this and doing it right. That's sticking more, I mean, it's the kitchen sink and then some, because that gives us the most flexibility when we go to Metro. If they look at it and go, it's fine, all of a sudden we've won the lottery. So if we don't ask for it, even if it's a stretch, it may be more difficult to add it in at a later date.
Okay, and likewise, though, the inverse of that, if we submit this, so my question is really, if we submit this to Metro, we don't have to do it all at the end result. We're going to have more work done, more analysis. You're going to have to, have the merge lane. I mean, there's a lot of details that have to be worked out. So some of this may fall away or change during this next segment of analysis by experts, by traffic engineers, et cetera.
Yes, and that would be part of by sticking everything to it, the presumption is not everything is going to survive, and you may come up with alternatives that through the engineering, the detailed engineering process of, oh wow, this works so much better because we've actually done true measurements and looked at actual conditions from a traffic standpoint. So that possibility exists very strongly, as long as we're still within that Metro box of their 710 EIR, we should be pretty good to move around inside.
Thank you for clarifying. Because, and like I said as well, I know that school district has to be heavily involved in changes that would happen, and I don't know if you're going to explore this, but it's school district property for the high school. Because it does require taking out and doing some engineering work on the campus proper, along with the things that we can do, curb treatments and et cetera. So I don't know if that's something that we can work with the school district and put forward as well as part of that plan, or how we could help the school district get this to be a workable project from there.
They are very engaged and excited about working with us to help them with their on-site issue. They've been very good, willing partners on this. Of course, they have funding issues, and we think within this, somehow or another, within the next several years, this can work out.
Okay, thank you very much.
I want to thank Director Throne and whoever's involved in this project for their efforts and time. And I just want to make sure that Director Throne, please work with everyone to make sure all questions are covered, answered going forward, and maybe we can use Dr. Kwan's information and just make sure everything is smooth. Do you have a motion?
Can I make one more comment, because it's now reached the point where two of you talked about it. I think it's substantially unfair to the public who have been, that came out and battled the issue over synchronization throughout town, that we now are discussing that as a potential or something further to look at. In my opinion, that ship has sailed. We noticed it, we had the discussion, we voted against it, and to bring it back up is really substantially unfair to the public, who probably, I'm sure many looked at this list and said, okay, there's no synchronization, I'm not going to come up, I'm not going to come here and talk about it. So really, that ship has sailed, at least in the public's eyes, and to be completely transparent and fair to the public, we should not be talking about raising that issue again. And because I know there are people that are not here today, but were screaming and yelling at us before on the synchronization. So we have to be very careful in that regard, because we lose the public trust if we start talking about things that we've already voted down at a subsequent meeting when they're not here.
Right, and I will also say it was a 3-to-1 vote, so even if Councilmember Jacobowski would have been there, which I think would, she also made the motion to reconsider it at our subsequent meeting when we went through the painful exercise of clarifying things. And again, it's a 3-person majority that is against synchronization. So I completely agree with Councilmember Talt, and I think we need, that is long dead and buried in this community, and by a majority of the council acting upon it.
Mr. Mayor, if you're about to move to a motion, I just want to clarify where I think you are headed, so that we know what your direction would be. Based on head nods and body language, what I'm understanding is that the majority of the council would not be in favor of us trying to pursue funding from Metro or otherwise on synchronization, but that a majority of the council is interested in us seeing if we could get more money for the Atlantic intersection to deal with the pizza issue.
Why are we even discussing
I don't know that
synchronization?
Okay.
Okay, that's been voted on twice. Let's not even mention that again. No more.
I didn't bring it up.
Yes, you did.
I'm going to withdraw my comments about synchronization.
Yeah, I concur with Vice Mayor and Councilman Patel. Anyway, so do I have a motion? Anyone?
Do you want to make it? I will go ahead. I move to approve Measure R Projects 1 and 2 as refined and attach this report with the understanding that further modifications may occur as a result of input today, and direct the city manager to meet with Metro staff to review the projects to ensure all project elements are eligible for Measure R funding, update the estimated project costs, and submit a draft funding agreement and implementation schedule, taking into consideration possible future work by the school district or high school to the city council at a future meeting. So my motion is that before you do anything with Metro, you bring us back the potential Metro agreements.
And also,
The next step would have been to have the discussion of the funding agreements with you, and give you significant lead time. Are you saying you want us to come back to you prior to that? Or is that?
Well,
you're
no,
just confirming
that's fine, but I just wanted, in reading the draft of this motion, I was concerned that you're meeting with Metro staff to review the project to ensure all project elements are eligible to measure our funding, period. You will also update the estimated project costs and submit to council a draft funding agreement and implementation schedule, taking into consideration possible future work by the school district, the high school,
Yes.
to us in a future meeting.
may I offer an amendment that the instruction about the particular northbound lanes at Atlantic, is it Atlantic and Huntington, reflect in the plan that you bring to a project one, 3 separate lanes, one left, one through, and one right, as we discussed today.
That's
Well,
fine.
we had no discussion on that. I would refer to him if you're comfortable that that can be done, because I trust his expertise, and they came back with 4. I'm not arguing against the 3, it makes sense, but I don't want to impose something on an engineer that's trained in the area.
This is what your want is, and it may change as you discuss on all of these things that we're trying to stick to these papers. It might change if the traffic modeling shows something different, but that, certainly our direction is to have 3 lanes in the configuration that you've indicated, because that's going to be beneficial to the city.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I believe that's how it was before. Mr. Ruck, you recall? No, right?
So, Councilor Machado, you accepted the amendment?
I accept it.
Okay, so you have a motion. You still don't have a second.
I'll second it.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Jacobowski,
Yes.
Councilmember Tall,
Yes.
Councilmember Udi,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shepherd Rami,
Yes.
Mayor Huang.
Yes, motion passed. So now we move to item number 3. Approval of class specification, urban forester, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll actually be giving the staff report today. This report was a collaboration of multiple people. Your outgoing interim HR manager, Rich Dukellis, wrote the first draft of this. I offered some input, and then your new permanent human resources manager, Scott Pilch, who is in the audience for anyone in the community who has not met him yet, made some tweaks to this. And since so many hands were on it, it seemed unfair to stick it to the new guy. So I'm happy to be here to present the staff report to you. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. You will recall that in the budget process, one of your priority initiatives that you adopted was to create an urban forester position to be the tree czar, if you will, to take all tree issues under their purview and become the expert in that area and be the point person for all things tree related on staff. We presented you during that process with 3 separate options about how to do this. One option was to have a contract consultant. One option was to create a new position in-house, and the third option was to promote somebody internally, so as to not create a new body, but to create a new position. I presume largely for cost reasons, the council elected to do the final option, which was to promote somebody from within and not create a new position and not go out for a contract consultant position. So that was your direction during the budget process, and you did in fact adopt a budget that includes that position and funded it as such. And that means that you approved the salary range during the budget process. So the reason that this is in front of you is because the process here in San Marino is that the City Council approves all class specifications, which is a fancy HR way of saying job description, for each position and the salary range. So that's why it's in front of you. We have drafted it with input from the director, who's here to answer any questions that you might have in terms of subject matter expertise, ongoing development, those sorts of things. And we presented it to the association that the position will be represented by, the employee union, and it was approved by them as well. And so the final step is to put it in front of you for approval. And should we get that from you today, the next step will be to do the recruitment and see who from inside applies, and then make that appointment and move forward as such. So that concludes my staff report. I am here, Scott is here, and Michael is here. Should you have any questions for whichever one of us is most appropriate.
Main question, Councilmember Jacobowski.
Yes, thank you. So to clarify, if this is an internal promotion, there would not be two positions, but rather one going forward.
That is correct. Whatever internal position person would get the job, the existing position that that person was in would essentially be abolished from the budget.
Thank you. Second question, since this is a specialized position, is there ongoing training and information and perhaps even partnership available in the wider community for the person who would be selected to hold this position?
I will happily defer that question to the director.
Thank you, Councilmember. To maintain your certification as an arborist, you have to do continuing education. It's a minimum of 10 hours a year. It would include taking classes on risk assessment and the whole biology thing and pesticides. Remember, I'm an engineer first, so it's either alive or dead. So, and I certainly appreciate the whole biology thing.
That's going to be a problem for later.
I have great appreciation for biology. So there's different associations that the expectation is that certified arborists belong to. There's conferences that they go to remain current in their state of the art. There's also a variety of urban foresters surrounding us in some of the different cities that join us, and there would be an expectation that that person would be involved in whatever networking that would be needed to keep the different forests working together.
Thank you.
Councilmember Udi?
No questions?
Councilmember Tolt?
No questions.
Vice Mayor?
No, I'm absolutely thrilled. So thank you very much for doing this and bringing this forward. I am very anxious to get the position filled and have someone from our staff focus on preserving and protecting our trees, city and otherwise. So thank you.
I don't have any question either. Let's open this to the public. Any public comment? Seeing none. All right, back to comments. Councilmember Tolt?
I have no further comments.
Councilmember Jakubowski?
Good to go?
Councilmember Udi?
Okay with me? No.
Vice Mayor?
No.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move to approve the class specification for urban forester.
Any second?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Jakubowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Tall?
Yes.
Councilmember Udi?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shepherd Romney?
Yes.
Mayor Huang?
Yes, motion passed. Item number 4, approval of September 2019 public tree removal list.
Thank you, Mayor. The director is kicking Aldo Cervantes out of his seat and asking his certified arborist to come up, and the director will be presenting his staff report.
Grant us a moment here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Vice Mayor, and council members. The item before you this morning is a request that you approve the removal of certain selected public trees that are dead or diseased with no chance of recovery that are located in various city parkway strips, in our median parks, and in Lacey Park. The City Council earlier this year modified the city's street tree policy to require City Council approval before the department can remove public trees. Your approval process includes a review of the department's tree list by the City Council liaison. The council appointed Vice Mayor Shepherd Romney as the primary tree liaison and Mayor Wong as the alternate. The liaison's role is to review the draft list provided by the department and provide the recommendations to the full council. To comply with the new process, we performed an assessment of each tree using the International Society of Arboriculture Basic Tree Risk Assessment Form, which was completed by a certified arborist. Each assessment includes basic data about the tree, observations about its health, and recommendations of how to mitigate the risks involved with the tree remaining in place. Each assessment was prepared by Mr. Sam Estrada, who in addition to his duties as a Maintenance Worker 3, is the department's certified arborist. As we understand from the Vice Mayor's response to the department, there is agreement with all but 3 of the trees to be removed. 2 of the trees have risk mitigation options we'll explain to you, and 1 is a difference in opinion as to future tree health. Consequently, Mr. Estrada will be, in a moment, providing you with a short presentation about each tree that we see differently. I would like to note that 1 tree on our list self-removed by falling over in a rainstorm, fortunately not injuring anyone or creating property damage. 1 other tree located on Oak Grove Avenue was removed by persons unknown, as it appears that they did not want to wait for this process to be completed. We were requested by the school district to review an oak tree on West Drive here, and upon Mr. Estrada's recommendation to me, we brought in an outside consulting arborist to perform an in-depth health assessment at a cost of $1,700 to make sure we had the most and best information about that tree before we made a recommendation of its removal. Because this is a new process and we wanted to provide the council with the best information, we asked the city's arborist, Mr. Ron Servin, to make his own independent assessment. He inspected the 3 trees and confirms that they should be removed. He is available after our presentation should you wish to ask him questions. This assessment process in front of you is the level of detail we routinely do behind the scenes to make sure we are managing our urban forest in the best fashion possible. I estimate that over 40 hours of administrative and maintenance staff time was used to prepare for this agenda, which exceeds, unfortunately, our original estimate this past April of 34 hours. I would like to specifically thank the Vice Mayor for her time to personally visit each tree location and her insightful questions and comments that have helped us with improving the process. This has been a very time-intensive expenditure of effort on her part. I would like to turn over the presentation to Mr. Estrada, who will provide a general overview of his recommendations of the 3 specific trees. He will be available after our presentation to answer any tree questions you might have, and afterwards I have some concluding remarks.
Good morning, everyone.
Can I say something? I don't want to interrupt, and if you want to go through the exercise, I appreciate it, that you prepared. But in rereading this, I don't think that I'm going to oppose any of your recommendations, because I think that most importantly is public safety, and I think that's at the heart of it, so to speak, for all of these recommendations that you've had outside referrals also, as well as in-house with Ron, take a second look at some of these. So I appreciate that if everybody came to the same conclusions, I would not stand in the way. So I don't want to short circuit this, but I do want to short circuit it because everybody does, but I don't want to have you not be able to make the presentation, but I'm not going to fight on these. I have read the documents, including things that
So you would approve all the list, the whole list?
Yes.
I would say then in the interest of time, short-circuiting the process is probably appreciated after Michael apparently says this much.
Do we still need a presentation?
Let me conclude the presentation.
Please.
Sorry.
This is the point where the director starts, ripping through parts of the script and saying, we're not going to do this. I do want to remark that in this being the first time we've done this, there are some things that we are certainly going to do differently when we do this again. And it really has a lot to do with the Vice Mayor and her comments and her great interest in trees. One of the things that we clearly will do is look at how we're describing things and how we're putting things together. We'll be putting together a comment form so that it's a standardized way of looking at things. We found that while we knew where the trees were, we did not communicate specifically in a good way as to where the trees were.
Yes, there was some kind of punching going on.
There was some kind of punching. So some of the Vice Mayor's extra time is because we knew where things were, but we didn't communicate with them. So that's part of my concluding remarks. We certainly appreciate the council's interest in this and the Vice Mayor's dedication to this. as I conclude, I do want to recognize Mr. Estrada here. He is a consummate professional. I'm very pleased to be working with him. He is very enthusiastic about trees. He's more enthusiastic than I am, and I truly am enthusiastic about trees. And so, again, our recommendation is to go forward with the list and plant some new trees.
Okay, I want to thank the Vice Mayor for taking our time to visit all 34 trees. And so we should increase her pay to double. Yeah. All right, any questions?
I do have one question, because I'm trying to identify the tree. Do these include, the 34 include trees located at Lacey Park?
Yes.
Okay, there's one tree, and I just want to make sure it's not the one that's in the area of the play area.
The playground?
In between the bathrooms and the playground. I'm looking for a picture of that tree. Okay, location, let me just take a look at it.
There's a schematic of the map that was released on September 9th or 10th, right around there. That was,
On page 155.
yeah, that's the one that controls the park trees.
Why, do you have some copies of it?
No, but that's, there is the Patrick's tree, and I wanted to, I was trying to find it and to make sure that that's not the tree that led to Patrick's tree, or Patrick's.
He just wants to make sure that it's not a Patrick tree.
That's not the one. Okay.
That tree's not dead.
Well,
those trees are in the actual playground themselves.
oh, okay, I wasn't sure because the star location led me to believe that it might be, and I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, just more
Thank you.
clear.
Any other questions?
No, and I thank you to the Vice Mayor and to staff for their hard work on this issue, because I wasn't going to go visit 34 trees, so.
I got pictures of some of them too, but I just want to follow up on that comment that he made also because I knew about that tree because the San Marino Garden Club is working with the director and Mr. Estrada as a memorial to somebody in town to actually fund the replacement of that and be able to, the one that's coming out.
Okay.
And actually put in a slightly bigger tree is one of our goals in that location, and particularly because it will look nice when the construction is done, to have a nice tree in that location, etc. So that is something that I already knew about and support taking that out so we can put a nice tree in there that will benefit the community for longer. Thank you.
Councilman Eby?
Yeah, I got a question on process, because what this showed me is the level of detail that staff goes through to identify, remedial actions for trees. And we now have 2 trained arborists on staff, the trees are, and none of the 5 of us are, arborists. So I'm wondering for future processes, is staff empowered to act in a similar manner, or do these decisions still need to elevate to council?
You're asking this?
I'm just a clarification on current policies and ordinances.
I think that might be next.
I will take that question. In terms of clarification, the council at a previous meeting approved a change to the street tree policy, which is city-owned trees, to insert city council approval on any tree that was going to be removed. And the intervening step before it comes to city council would be that the tree liaison would have the ability and opportunity to see everything and then make a recommendation to the council for your consideration. So that is a policy change that you all approved at a previous meeting. If you didn't want that anymore, you would need to give us direction to change the policy and bring it back to you again. There may be a little bit of confusion because later in the agenda there is a request by the Vice Mayor to add this same policy and apply it to the private tree removals. It would be the same process, but as it stands right now, you have approved this process for city-owned trees, but not for private trees.
Yeah, because, I'm interested in other people's comments, but I personally, not being a trained arborist, I trust staff. And, you trust staff until you no longer trust the staff. And I don't think we need to elevate every decision to council to take up our time on this.
May I ask
a follow-up question to where Councilman Udi is. And I'm asking this of our attorney. Can you comment on staff recommendations that may be overridden by either, well, ultimately council, in terms of tree removal and the liability?
Under state law, there are both immunities and liabilities imposed on cities. And there is a liability for dangerous conditions on public property. That will arise in situations where either A, there's been some sort of negligence on the part of a city employee, or B, if the city is aware of a condition on public property that's dangerous ahead of time and didn't take action to remove that condition prior to some sort of accident occurring. So for example, in tree context, receiving a notice from an arborist, et cetera, or from someone else, as a matter of fact, that there's a dangerous condition on public property and no actions taken to address it. So those are provisions under state law, and they apply to any condition on public property. It could be a sinkhole, it could be any number of things, but it also applies to trees.
So that doesn't apply to private?
Correct, it does not apply to private property.
Thank you.
Question, Vice Mayor? Okay, I don't have any question either. Let's open this to public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion. Comments? Anyone?
Yeah, I have comments. I thank everybody for the amount of time and indulging this interest, because I think that the trees, and I think a majority of the council perhaps supports our tree management and our urban forester and concepts like that. And so it was my honor to work with staff to get this process going. And I think it's very valuable. I think the community would like a harder look at tree removals perhaps in the past, because mistakes have been made and they're not made now. I will say that. I've been on the other side of this as a resident who came in here when trees were taken out that were healthy, and of course it was on a Saturday, and it had been an order that the city had had, but there was no one there to oversee the work, and so we lost trees in that area south of Lorraine Road, and Brentford is still a really, I mean, it changed dramatically, that whole neighborhood, and that was a huge mistake. And I don't believe that's what's going on anymore, but I think that was the impetus for me initially to become involved in city government and try to work on the tree ordinance, and that led to me maybe getting here. But in any event, and I would like to continue to make sure that that doesn't happen. And this is the way that, sort of through staff and prior attorneys, that I felt like I could do that. But I recognize that public safety comes first. And if there are arborist reports that conclude that, and our staff has concluded that, then I will always understand that that's the first priority. But I just feels that we still need to keep this process going, and I hope other council members value my time, that this is a big thing for the city and for residents to know that we are having a look at trees, and that we pursue this process to ensure that mistakes that are very significant, I mean financially for those homeowners in that area in particular, as well as aesthetically, et cetera, for all of us. So I'm hoping that this will continue. I think that it was productive to go through the exercise the first time. I understand it better, and I may just be a small voice in town, but I think this is really important as a resident. You know, I love trees, and so I was concerned that some of these trees that were nominated for removal, so to speak, or slated for removal, were very much still green, particularly the one in front of the San Marino School District, and as well as offices here on West. And that is an oak tree, so it's doubly painful for me. However, after 2 arborist reports, I appreciate that there are things that I can never understand that go inside of a tree, but I appreciate that whole process of going through that and discovering that there are internal problems, despite the fact that it looks as I drive by, and I took pictures of it that I was going to distribute today, but that it looks like a very vibrant tree. But I would never want any harm to come to a pedestrian or or anybody, a driver. So I think that that's important to know, and I do think it's worthwhile for our community to go through this exercise. I'm sorry it's taken longer than expected for staff, and time spent on that, but I don't think it's time wasted at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's time well spent. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'd like to thank the Vice Mayor for putting that into context. I certainly remember the Redford debacle well, and I was comforted that in the end you saw that the city's recommendations were fit, and it feels like you're reframing this as just an extra set of eyes and ears, which is a good thing. Thank you for your work.
Well, I could echo with Vice Mayor. I would like to use an analogy. I don't know if it's a good example. You know, I respect the certified arborist's opinion, just like, you know, like the physicians in hospital, and we have our family members dying in the, you know, the deathbed, and I look at ourselves as the family members making that final decision to pull or not. And also back to, like, you know, when we had that windstorm in 2011, a lot of the trees that fell were actually you know, good ones, not dead ones. So I don't really think it's necessary to remove all the dead ones sometimes. But anyway, it's just my 2 cents.
Can I throw in my 2 cents?
No, you had your chances.
You guys skipped me, man.
What, I had my final say. I did, I asked any comments. All right, there we
No,
go.
and here's the problem that you have. First of all, I agree and I appreciate all the work that the Vice Mayor has, and to have us go through this process is very valuable. But what's going to happen when you're mayor? What's going to happen if you're no longer on the council? You know, is there going to be someone on the council that has the drive to go out and review all 34 trees? Having said that, I think we should continue, at least now since we've started this urban forester project person, and to see how that will help us in feeling more and more confident about the decision. So I'm in favor of it still right now, but I am concerned what's going to happen.
That's exactly right. I mean, we had something and you fixed it. You got involved fixing it. Thank you, and I support the outcome and the trees and all of that. I just am thinking about the process going forward, because when you have a process in place and you have trained professionals, you trust the process and you trust the professionals until such time as you learn that the professionals aren't professional or the process doesn't work. So I think we got to get to where we're comfortable with that, so that, you know, we streamline, make the city more efficient, save some money, you know, in the process. So, you know, I don't know if that decision is today, but I want to plant that seed so as we get comfortable over the next couple rotations that we can take this off of our plate and leave it on staff's plate.
Right, well, okay, just to...
Would you like to volunteer for, or no?
I'll volunteer for the next year, yes, of course. But just so everybody here is clear, a lot of cities have a commission, I'm gonna say, that's maybe the landscape commission or something. It's on, obviously, public safety usually. But they do have residents or a voice in the process of determining trees, so that it doesn't have to go, and then city council does what we're doing today and basically takes staff recommendations. The community has looked at those trees and agrees, or even adds some, because I know that there's some out there that are towering that look really dead as well that could have been on this list. So to eliminate a community voice altogether, whether it's mine on council because I'm volunteering, or on a committee, landscape committee, for example, for Lacey Park might be another thing, but that, anyway, it might be better placed in one of those in the long term. But I do think the community feels strongly, not just myself, that there needs to be an involvement about our trees and to help the management. So I would not see this going away, definitely during my time, and it may be at a different level or a different position in the city, so, but that's my thoughts.
Okay, so do I have a motion? Vice Mayor.
Well, somebody else can move. I'm gonna cut down on dead trees. Be on record as the tree butcher.
What is the, I think so, yeah.
You can even go right after Jennifer.
It is recommended, let's see. No, that's.
You might want to move that the City Council approve the September 2019 recommended tree removal list and authorize the Director of Parks and Public Works to move forward to properly remove the trees on this list.
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passed. Now let's move to item number 5, discussion regarding elements of the tree preservation ordinance and the tree policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because this item involves a couple of different people, I'm actually going to do the preliminary staff report and then turn it over a little bit. What we're looking for today is for you to have discussion and provide us with any direction that you'd like to provide us with on 4 separate issues related to trees. And I just want to walk you through each 4 before we dive into each one. The first issue is an issue that each of you have raised with me, which is concerns about our fine structure for tree removals. So what we have in front of you today is an item for consideration for you to give us direction on how, if at all, you'd like us to revise our tree fine structure for removals. This item does not address pruning, but if you'd like to discuss pruning as part of your conversation, Director Cervantes is very well prepared to have that conversation with you should you want to. For this item, Aldo will present a staff report. He has done extensive research on this and looked at other cities, and he does have a recommendation for you about what to consider. Of course, that recommendation is not binding, and you are free to do whatever at least 3 of you want to do, and then we will move to revise that. Once we receive your direction today, then the director will go back and start revising the tree ordinance to take it through the ordinance approval process. So that's item number 1. Item number 2 that's in front of you, you actually heard about several hours ago from Jeanette from Edison. This concerns emergency removals. You may recall that in our street tree policy, there is a provision for emergency removal of trees that would not come to the council, would not come through the normal permit process. And in the moratorium that we had in place for a short period of time, there was also an emergency removal provision. When the actual tree ordinance was adopted, it just somehow fell through the cracks. There is no emergency removal provision in the private tree removal process. So what that means is Jeanette, as you heard this morning, is having some trouble with their emergency issues, trees on power lines and so forth. There's no exception in the ordinance right now for us to grant that on an emergency basis. They have to go through the whole tree permit process, which is sometimes quite lengthy. So we do not intend to give a staff report on this morning. If you have questions, certainly you can. Otherwise, what the director is going to be doing is preparing a change to the ordinance that will essentially mirror the emergency removal provision that's in the street tree policy and was in the moratorium, and we'll begin the process of taking that through. So once we get to that second item, if you have questions about it, staff is available to answer them, but it doesn't seem like we need to make a whole presentation. The third, I just want to give you a brief overview of all 4 things and then turn it over. The third and fourth things were items that were requested by the Vice Mayor for you to consider in terms of policy changes. Item number 3 concerns the street tree policy, so that goes back to Public Works, not planning and building. The issue here is that the current street tree policy that the council has adopted gives staff the discretion on tree replacements based on several criteria. That is to say that if a tree ends up coming out, the department has the discretion to make a determination on putting a different tree in instead of the current tree if it meets certain criteria. That is in your street tree policy, and certainly Director Throne can walk you through what those criteria are. There was some concern after a replacement previously that the Vice Mayor was concerned about a removal that, a replacement that was ordered by the director. And so the item before you this morning is to have discussion and provide direction to us on whether you'd like to change the street tree policy to essentially remove staff's discretion and mandate a like-for-like replacement. Again, we don't really have a staff report for you on that. I imagine the Vice Mayor can speak to that. And if you have questions, staff certainly is available. And then the fourth and final thing bounces back to the Planning and Building Department and relates back to the tree ordinance again. At the way that the process stands right now, the council approval and tree liaison process that you just discussed, and as I mentioned earlier, does not apply when residents are coming in to request a tree permit for removal. Staff has the final discretion on approving or denying that. It can then go through, of course, the full appeal process, but the initial approval process is handled by staff. There were some concerns raised by the Vice Mayor about a particular permit that was approved. And so her request this morning is that you take that tree liaison process that we just talked about and add it to the tree ordinance as well for private trees. We don't have staff report on that either, but of course we're happy to answer questions if you have them. So those are the 4 issues in front of you. Fines will be first, and I will turn it over to Director Cervantes for his report to you and then your discussion on that. And then the other 3 items, Mr. Mayor, are at your pleasure, how you want to go through those.
Thank you, Dr. Marlowe, and members of the council, members of the audience. I did provide in the staff report some background and history related to our fine structure from prior. Prior to the current fine structure that you see as attachment 1, prior to that fine structure, there was a fine structure that included a penalty of $1,000 per violation, which is consistent to our violations section of the code, which is in chapter 1. This also included, the violation and the fine also included that of severe pruning as well as complete removal of the trees. In 2011, the fine structure was very similar to the current adopted structure. The only difference is that the 2011 structure did not include the fines for heritage trees. That wasn't until the current adopted structure, which was adopted this year. For council's reference, attachment 1 of the report does include the fine structure, and attachment 2 of the report includes examples of fines that are currently being administered by cities that are surrounding, which also includes similar tree protection requirements. As you can see under attachment 2, the fines administered through the cities of Pasadena, Palo Alto, and Beverly Hills are somewhat similar, where they not only provide the administrative fine of $1,000 per violation, but also include a civil fine of $5,000 per violation. The city of Palo Alto also includes a provision that places a construction moratorium on any active construction site if there's a tree violation, and the moratorium is not lifted until the violation is remedied or abated. I do have some questions related to that provision in the city of Palo Alto. Is that AB 2913 does include a provision, which is a state law that allows for a building permit to have a life cycle of 12 months. So we'll have to vet that, of course, before we introduce that kind of a language into the code. The city of South Pasadena has a very similar fine structure as the city of San Marino with regards to the magnitude of the fine. The basis for the fine, as described in that city, is based off the value of the tree that's been damaged, as well as severely pruned. Under this fine structure, the owner is subject to replacing the trees that have been lost, a fine that doubles the application fee, and a fine that is based off double the valuation of the tree that's been removed. Pursuant to the tree valuation, or pursuant to a report that I have that does evaluate the value of a tree, for example, in that report, it identifies a jacaranda tree, which is, in our case, a heritage tree. With a DBH of 15.2 inches, that DBH means at 4.5 foot level measurements. At 15.6 inches, the value of that tree, if it's in good condition, is $16,000. So based off that valuation of that tree, under South Pasadena's rules, that would be a fine of $32,000. In our case, based off the same parameters of that tree, similar size and so forth, our fine would be $25,000, so just less than South Pasadena's fine structure. And that's why I referenced that it's a very similar fine structure with respect to ours versus South Pasadena. Now the differences are, with respect to both cities, is that South Pasadena has a mathematical approach to determining the actual fine structure or the fine of that tree, whereas our structure in years past has not had some kind of a scientific or mathematical approach to determining those fines. And so with that said, I do open up for questions related to the fines. If you have any questions, I'm available for it. Vice Chair?
Yeah, I just, before we go down this road, so I understand, because I did some research, of course, and I know that just generally I think that people were surprised, and the problem that has driven this perhaps is that we actually, it's not so much the total tree fine, it's that we add up branch by branch when it's over 3 inches. And so we were doing 1,000
Yes.
per cut, and then we were getting these very large fines for trimming and then adding it to the tree. costs when they ultimately.
Depends on the
so-
circumstances.
Right, so ultimately, we were getting huge numbers in the last year because those two things, the branch, 1,000 per, and tree costs together, we reached very high
Right.
levels that was alarming to the community, is that
Right.
fair to say? So we're visiting that. And I appreciate the city, well, I appreciate all the work that you did, this is fantastic. And seeing this here, as well as the concern or question that I have is about the South Pass formula, which is new to them, or new-ish, right? And it talks about the most recent edition, and that's of ISA Guide for Plant Appraisal. Now, of course, I can't find that online because you gotta buy the book, and it's $150, and what am I gonna do with it after today? But so, this is what I think is getting at, so I just wanted to, I found this online, here, I'm sorry. Can I pass this over there and everybody can have it? It has to do with the trunk formula method. Is that what we're talking about here? Because this is kind of a rundown, for example, just online. Is that what they're using? Because I wasn't sure what this means, because I don't know what the guide to plant appraisal is.
Yes, so in the example that I have where I illustrated the plan for South Pasadena with respect to the formula they use, is indeed this exact formula. So they use the 10th edition of the guide to plant appraisal. They also use a second guide, which is a 10th edition of a guide which is Uniform Standard of Professional Appraisal Practices. And so, in fact, what you just handed out is exactly similar to what's in that report itself. Yes.
Okay, thank you, because I wanted to clarify what we were talking about. And then, so I personally love our fines. But I think that we have to separate out when a whole tree is removed and not add up the branches. But if other council members, and you'll find out now, don't want to go with it, then there is the South Pass. And I also wanted to bring to your attention one other thing, and it is a way that La Cañada also, sorry, can you pass it over to Aldo? Because this came after we talked, and I have these for other council members. And it's a way that La Cañada also puts in penalties if there's an unintentional removal. If you go to the second page and then the third, you actually see the charts. I mean, there's a lot of whereases on the first page. And there's a tree replacement fund that they actually add into there. This is 2014, I believe, so it's fairly recent. So that is another thing, and that actually goes to the city and could help further our tree replacement, as well as a restitution chart. And that's similar, I guess, to what you're saying is that appraisal concept.
Right.
But this is another way that they've just set, and again, I don't know about these dollar figures, but they've set specific amounts that are gonna be perhaps out there if this new way of doing it, because the community doesn't have access to the tools unless we upload something, might be very confusing. And you're not really, remember, the reason for this existing fine structure, and I believe you say it in your report, is that they want to deter people from chopping down trees and then asking for forgiveness later. So the numbers are high to do that very thing, instead of, and it has changed it. So that all has to go together in whatever numbers or approach we adopt. For example, if we go with the South Pass or the system that you're talking about, then we need to have some sort of examples, say online, so they know that that means $16,000 for a jacaranda. That's 14 inches at breast height, the diameter, right? So I really think in order to have the same deterrence effect, we need to have some examples online. If that's a concern for other council members, as it is strongly for me in keeping our fine structure, but knowing that that might not be where we go.
And you bring up two great points, and that's with respect to the formula that is being used with reference to the guides. I do want to state that when the use of formula is not solely based off of the breast height of the tree as measured for now. There's a lot of other factors that are associated with that condition of the tree. There's also a trunk area that they measure, which is the largest size of the tree, to determining the actual amount that is the value of the tree. The other point that is worth noting is in what you handed out, as well as with the South Pass provisions, they do include this unintentional piece of it, which I have found to be sort of in practice of this ordinance been more of the cases where the homeowner had instructed a gardener or someone to make, I guess, I won't say improvements to a tree, but to prune a tree. I'm used to saying improvements because
You sit next to me too much.
right, where it's sort of been unintentional. It hasn't been so much the owner's fault in the situation than that of the gardener or some kind of a contractor. And so South Pasadena has provisions to deal with that circumstance as well as the example you provided. So it's worth discussing that as well as adding that into our proposed ordinance. So I just wanted to bring that out as a possibility of including that, if that's what the council sees fit.
Right, but that's going to get back to what we always hear when we have tree appeals, is that I didn't mean to do it and I didn't know.
Right.
It's not my fault. I hired Joe because he was here and I said, hey, can you trim my tree? And I came back and
That is true.
look what happened. I'm so sorry, you can't find me. I mean, so everybody's going to say it's unintentional the minute you say you're going to find them. I mean, I think that's human nature, if not the test of veracity. And it would be more difficult for you guys to enforce. It puts you in a more difficult, not you personally, but it puts staff in a more difficult position because you're judging residents and their truthfulness. So I think that's part of, we should say that it's intentional or not, and here's the fine instead of giving this other category, and then you're going to be spending a lot of time deciding between the two. I really hesitate to go there. And I know that that's the intention, but it's a problematic, I think.
I don't hesitate to go there because I believe that to fine everybody in a punitive fashion when indeed there could be issues where it was a mistake is unfair. I mean, I've had, unless we're going to reduce, my concern isn't so much with the removal of trees. People intentionally remove a tree for whatever reason, there should be a substantial penalty associated with that. When you have a tree, you trim a tree, it looks fine, it survives, and yet we come in and find somebody, it just seems, find somebody for the destruction of the tree when in fact the tree has not been destroyed. It seems like we're not giving enough opportunity to the staff to review those types of situations and exercise some discretion in that regard.
Well, I would agree, but I would put that at the $1,000 per 3-inch limb issue. That's how it adds up. But you can
Well,
say-
so, yeah, because, I mean,
that was wrong. I know, we
yeah,
understand that.
Do we have questions? Let's have questions
Yes.
first. And then we'll have comments later.
I framed it in a question.
What was your question?
Mr. Trebek.
What was your question? Anyway, Councilman Chibose, question?
Yes, I have a few questions, thank you. I think most of us have very, very strong feelings about the oak trees and what they represent in the city. If we look at the number of types of trees under the category of heritage, about how many would you put that at?
On private property or public?
Private, since that's where the fines should be.
I'd have to go back to the code to actually count the number.
Just a ballpark.
Probably about 40 or so.
So there's a significant number of ways that residents could mess up by attacking a heritage tree as opposed to a non-specified tree.
Oh, how many species? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's 50.
Okay, so that's a significant number. What I had said when we first discussed this issue, when we looked at this ordinance in the Tribune, I remember it taking up a full page in very small font. I don't believe that our public is thoroughly educated at this point. And I previously requested that as we're going into this, that we give the community more time to become educated. We don't want ill will, and I've heard a little bit about that from some residents saying, you know, this is starting to get out of control. We want them to be informed and doing the right thing as opposed to being uninformed. And I think there is a clear difference. I can't believe on a construction site where a tree is in the way and it's just taking out, that that would be unintentional. I would have total comfort in enforcing that to the fullest extent. But I do believe with many residential, I don't think anyone's looking to come in with a $40,000 fine saying, well, you know, I know I can't do this, but I'm going to do this anyway. So I think we really need to take a closer look at that issue. The other thing I want to mention, I know there was a fine levied earlier this year for topping a tree, and that homeowner eventually went to the planning commission showing how the tree had grown in as the season moved along, and as I understand it, that was removed. Could you make some comments on topping and the regrowth of the trees and how it affects residents' appeals when they come forward after being fined?
A couple of things, and this actually gets to Commissioner Talt's, Councilmember Talt's. I'm used to planning commission, I'm sorry. Where there is sort of the circumstance of a pruning or severe pruning of a tree, even to a topping of a tree, in that when we initially look at that tree, is there a situation in which it's irreversible? Is there a situation where the tree will thrive with, of course, some maintenance to it, which is one of the cases that we had looked at a couple of months ago. And to use that as an example, there was a situation where there was a severe pruning. We had fined the individual. They had taken steps to look for how to mitigate any further damage to that tree. And so they took steps to not only hire an arborist, but to hire professionals to take care of the tree long-term, of course. And they have a game plan to take care of the tree in the next 3 or 5 years. By the time that we got to the hearing process, the tree had flourished. The tree had came back and survived. And in that situation, in front of the Planning Commission, they had reversed the fine because it was found that the tree had, of course, had survived and will thrive. And that tree is going to likely make it and not be damaged in the long term. So long as the applicant follows his game plan of ensuring that in a 3 or 5 year plan that there will be certain trimming and balanced trimming and maintenance of the tree moving forward. And so to answer the question specifically is it has a lot to do with the outcome, because if the property owner is taking proper steps to ensure the protection of the tree, although it's been severely pruned, the case has shown that fines have been reversed in that situation.
So would you be in favor of a fine reversal or revising the way the code is written?
Well, currently, if a tree has been damaged or removed, there is an option or ability of the property owner to appeal our decision to the Planning Commission. And we'll, in current practice, we've allowed the Planning Commission to make those calls. And also commission the council on appeal as well.
Thank you.
But going back to the irreversible piece of this, the prior codes, I would say prior to 2011, the definition of a damaged tree included irreversible damage. And so if we look to incorporate that back into the language, it allows for us to prior to jumping to a fine, to look at ways to mitigate any further damage to the tree, look at ways to work with the property owner to see the survival of the tree rather than jumping directly to the fine.
Thank you. One final question. On that issue of education, since we passed the ordinance, can you talk a little bit, I know there's some brochures in the lobby, but the specifics of outreach that have occurred in making residents more aware that this ordinance is now in effect?
We've had a town hall meeting specifically on tree protection measures and the tree preservation ordinance. It did, to some extent, talk about the fines. We've had one meeting with the Chinese Club to also talk about the tree preservation ordinance. A second meeting with the Chinese Club also included, although a vast amount of information, a small piece of it was, again, to talk about the tree preservation process.
Is there any plan, or could there be a plan to send some general helpful information to homeowners? I like the idea of it being documented that we've sent this to you, and if your mailing address is correct, you have received it. There's something about that notification that's helpful.
In fact, in 2011, prior to that adoption, we had developed a postcard that went out to all the property owners identifying the significant changes of that ordinance, and we can certainly look to do that again.
Thank you.
Councilmember, you any questions?
One question, a couple comments and one question. And I don't know what the right answer here is, but our current fines feel excessive to me. Like Councilman Toll, I think there's a huge difference between intentional and unintentional. Education is a huge thing. I think that's on us. It's not on them to help us bridge that. So we need an education plan, and a town hall meeting, Chinese club, that doesn't do it. I mean, that just doesn't do it. We got to figure out how to do that a lot better. I think whatever we come up with there should be a strong foundation, a basis for it, and be comparable with like communities or neighborhoods. And then also, it's probably more question to Stephanie is, are there legal constraints we need to be aware of as we shape what our policy should be?
You've got me on tree issues. With respect to, yes, there are provisions of state law, both in the government code and the penal code, that set maximum violation limits for criminal fines. One thing that's already in your ordinance that I think this is sort of along the line with the Mayor Pro Tem was talking about, that in addition to any penalties, by requiring replanting of other trees, which can occur either both on the city property or on the subject property where the tree was removed or where the tree was severely trimmed and died. If there's not room to replant there, then some of it can either go on a city property or go to a city tree fund. I think all of those things are viable options that the city can pursue. And let's face it, if you have to replace a 36-inch or a mature tree, that is a huge cost. But it's not a penalty, and it does relate to the damage that was done.
Yeah,
so those are all viable ways.
Because I think we need to keep in mind the end in mind, and I think our end in mind is a flourishing tree environment in our community.
Right.
So fines might not achieve that end in mind, but forcing replanting could.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
I had a couple thoughts since the question. We did discuss, okay, sorry, I'll frame it as a question. We did discuss postcards, I believe, and I think after the last, I don't know, I think it was more of a budget issue and what to include there, and we held off on it because we knew we were going to come in to some extent because you had to draft it and do it and fund it, but also because we knew already that we would be looking back at this. Is that my understanding, and is it something that the department could do once our new ordinance revisions are done, let's say, and do a mass mailing in the households as well as better coverage in the paper somehow than printing, as my council member Jacobowski mentioned, very fine type, and who's going to read that? And it's in the bottom page of the corner. You're looking for pictures anyway. Tribune and Outlook.
In the prior attempt, or in the prior postcard that we put together, staff had designed that postcard.
Okay.
It was so to save costs, we take that initiative to design it. All we had to do was pay for the production of that postcard, and so we can take the same measures this time around and follow up with that.
Okay. And one other thing, this is a question, legit. In here, or correction actually, because I think there's some errors in the language. I believe for our council this started in 2018. When we prioritized, it was as far back in March, and then if you know the moratorium was adopted last March, and then the other work was done in February. So there's an error on the first page and somewhere else that I just didn't want to point out because it has taken us a long time. So there's a couple things in there, just to clarify for the community. It's been a long time in coming, and we spent a lot of effort on this.
Vice Mayor and Director, what was the content of the previous postcard?
I believe it included the fine structure, as well as the definitions of established tree. it was a very small postcard, so we had to sort of figure out what to put on there, but
And did it also say you have to have a licensed tree trimmer? We were trying to make people aware of that, or was that changed, has that changed? I'm not sure.
no, that has not changed. So if I remember correctly, it was the fine structure as well as the definitions.
I have a couple of comments. Just question: do you have a new fine schedule that you think would be more appropriate?
Well, in the staff report, I mentioned the South Pasadena approach because it's a very similar type of structure in terms of the magnitude of fines. So attachment 1 of the report is our existing fine structure. And so if you take a look at the amount of these fines versus the method that South Pass uses, you're almost looking at almost close to identical in terms of the magnitude of the fine. So if the council sees fit to incorporate something that is close to what we have now, I would say that the South Pasadena model using the formula would be the best.
With this fine schedule, would it cost more to removing branches than the total removal?
That's a good question. In fact, the cities that I've researched with respect to fines have defined what in a pruning situation, what a severe pruning would be. In the case of South Pasadena, they state that if you prune more than 20% of a heritage tree, I believe, and that's considered a severe pruning and would be subject to the fine structure. Being that it is not a complete removal, the fine would be obviously much less than what you see in the math or in our tables.
Because in the past 2 years, there were a couple of cases where the pruning actually cost more than the total removal, which doesn't make any sense.
And these are items that we're going to certainly fix with the amendment to the code.
Yeah, I think we should look into that, where the most hefty fine would be total removal.
Right.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to open this to public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none. All right, back to comment. Councilmember Yudi.
No,
Councilmember Tchaikovsky.
I go back to where I was previously. I just think that we need to account for our education, and not only a mailer to each registered owner, but as the Vice Mayor referenced, having some diagrams. I think that really assists people in knowing what's what. Then I would feel extremely comfortable in assessing as we need to. Our dialogue today still includes some hefty fines. And I just feel we owe it to the homeowners to have thorough, but not overarching information, but again, something perhaps with diagrams and stating what is the expectation. Otherwise, I think we're still going to have a lot of uninformed homeowners, and we're going to be back again on this issue.
Councilman Mathol.
I like the South Pasadena fine schedule. I think it serves our purposes as well to ensure
you very much. That concludes all of our business items.
Okay, now written communications or public writing? Seeing none. Public comments? Seeing none. Meeting adjourned. I'm gonna reconvene the special meeting. Thank you. Thank you for your.
Thank you.